What the fuck is up, world? Piali, Tlaltic Pac. We back in this bitch. Another podcast for that ass. Another Grito, se ha dicho. Coming about a month-ish time since the previous episode. And you know what, dog? I finally figured it out. I'm finally settling into the flow of things. It's been, dog, 6 years? I don't know how fucking long. Honestly, it's been a long time since I've been doing this, right? Time flies like this in the best of ways and the worst of ways. You know what I'm saying? But it's taken me this long is the point of what I'm trying to get to finally figure out what it is that I want from this podcast, dog. And at this point, it seems like, it doesn't seem, I know the 1 month break is where it's at, because it gives me time to actually sit and process my thoughts, as well as not only flesh them out, but hopefully properly articulate them as well. And moreover, it also hopefully gives you time to be able to digest the previous episode and, you know, have the ideas fomenting in your own personal mind in order to continue along the trajectory with the forthcoming episode, which would be this one, a continuation on the previous episode. I'm going to get better. It's an intention of mine to get better with being more chronological with the podcasts, instead of just saying things like, one of these days I'm going to talk about that. Like, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to break this bitch open, and we're going to dissect, and we're going to analyze, and it's going to be a seminar, dog. I'm going to treat it more appropriately in terms of the philosophical discussions that I've been having thus far, like in a seminar format. And part of the seminar implies that they're going to be longer, dog. I've always tried to be mindful of your time, and I still am. Don't get me twisted. I appreciate every ounce of attention that you show towards this podcast. It sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, it means so much to me. Okay. This is a project of passion. I don't do this for financial reasons. I do it because it helps, organize a lot of the thoughts and ideas that I have in my head, as well as fulfills the need to express them and share them with other people, right? In hopes of building on future dialogue and establishing connections with like-minded individuals, as well as those that don't agree with me, dog, because that's where the real connections are at, when you're able to discuss shit with people that don't agree with you and still come to a mutual understanding that could potentially lead to more and better beneficial insights down the line. It's something along the lines of what this episode is going to be about when we inevitably get to the Marcuse section, right? But that's a long ways away, homie. Because before we get to the Marcuse section, there's so much other shit I want to talk about. And that's the podcast, dog. That's what I finally figured out was the Grito. You know what I mean? These ideas and thoughts that I've been fomenting within your boy that are finally, after however long, getting the opportunity to be shared with other people. And as the introduction, for those of you who watch this on YouTube suggests, and for those of you who only listen on audio only, I'll tell you, it is philosophy, conspiracy theories, and horror movies. And there's other shit in there as well, too. Don't get me twisted, but that's what my life revolves around. You know what I mean? And for the longest time, I had a really difficult time trying to figure out what it is that I wanted this podcast to be in relation to those three things. And being mindful of the fact that I wanted to be able to pump out at least an episode every 2 weeks, but hopefully I shot 1 year for once every week was a lot. And I don't think personally rather, that the content suffered because of it. But to be fair, it was during like the whole lockdown shit. So I had a lot of free time to sit down and actually read and write an entire, episode in a week's time. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. And that's okay, because again, even with a week's time, there's still so much that, I don't know, me personally, dog, I am not, and I have never been, and I never will be the type of person that immediately says the first thing that comes to my mind. Like, if you ask me my opinion on things, likely, like, yeah, I can tell you, like, I think this, and that, but I'll always qualify it by saying, like, but, I don't know, I could, haven't really thought about that in a long time, or my ideas on this aren't properly fleshed out, unless it's something I really, really believe in. You know what I'm saying? But even then, I still leave a lot of room for potential growth, because that's what life is, dog. It's a continuous succession of growth. You know what I'm saying? So because of that, I don't really like to just, tell me the first thing that's on your mind right now. Like, I'll say shit, you know what I mean? But it's not like, don't hold me to this because I could potentially change. And when I was doing the week-long episodes, I felt as though I was kind of under the gun and trying to get out these ideas as quickly as possible without properly fleshing them out. So the whole point of this being is that I hope you enjoyed the break, the month-ish long break from the podcast. I know I did, and I really, really, really enjoyed putting together this episode for you, and I hope you enjoy it too. It's going to be long, dog. I wrote 33 pages, and I'm going to talk 33 pages. There's no way I'm going to record 33 pages in one sitting. And if you can listen to it in one sitting, my hat off to you, homie. Okay? Because this is going to be, I don't know how long it's going to be. I'm barely starting right now. Let's see. I'm at, how many minutes am I at? I am at about 6 minutes already with just the introduction alone, right? So my guess is probably somewhere between an hour and a half, 2 hour mark, potentially longer, right? And if you are able to marathon all of that at one sitting, straight up, homie, I appreciate the fuck out of you. And even if you aren't able to marathon it through one sitting, but you're still able to get through the very end, I appreciate the fuck out of you, dog. And even if you only tune in and listen to a little bit, I appreciate the fuck out of you. And even if you only tune in to find shit to talk shit about to me, I appreciate the fuck out of you, dog. We're all in this together. There is no competition. I hope we all fucking make it and we all play our own role in the process of doing so, right? So with that said, let's go ahead and get some of the formalities out of the way. If you haven't already, follow your boy, OG_IceNice13 on the gram, OG__IceNice13 on X, though I'm not really, I'm going to start using it more. I promise. I'm slowly getting the hang of it, right? And YouTube, of course, if you commenting on the YouTube shit, I appreciate the fuck out of that for sure. As well as some shout outs. I'll start first with Desert Bruja on Instagram, right? I can't explain to you how much I truly value all your feedback that you always provide for me. It means so much to me, for reals. Okay. Damn, I'm forgetting the motherfucking. I'm gonna just leave it at that, dog. I'm gonna leave it at that. That was just for now, right? Just for the sake of the episode, I'm gonna leave it at those particular shout outs, right? And I'm not trying to slight you. I'm not trying to diss you. It's just, I don't have the shout outs written down. I was trying to freestyle it again, like always, and it didn't work out that way. My bad, right? So, yeah, dog, with that said, let's go ahead and get into this bitch, right? The first thing that I wanted to start with, honestly, this was actually came on the heels of a conversation that I had with somebody. But at the same time, it was the conversation itself just really galvanized more shit that I've been learning as in the reconnecting process specifically. And the conversation just happened to take place like that evening that I learned it or the day after. I'm not exactly sure the timeline, right? But the whole idea is, with the reconnecting shit is like, it's been, and I mentioned it before, dog, but it bears repeating, okay? It's been a beautiful journey, no doubt about it, okay? But it's also unquestionably been something of a painful one, which, is perfectly on brand for what the Nahuatl teaches us, that there is beauty, but most importantly, that there is pain, okay? That there's growth or pain and growth, I should state specifically, but that the pain itself should not be a reason as to why we seek trying to avoid the growth in the first place, right? Like, it's going to hurt, but you got to seek it. Okay. And in this particular case, the latest pain and growth that has come to me has come to terms, or has come by way rather of coming to terms, not only with the enormous responsibility that our ancestors demanded of themselves, but that which we, inherit if we do in fact choose to honor their ways. This is one of the things that I've slowly started to understand that our connected relatives complain about, and rightfully so, about the disconnected relatives. And that is the way that we don't necessarily always treat the knowledge and traditions with the respect that they deserve, right? I know I've mentioned it before, but the example that will always stick out to me, because I was very guilty of this myself, was the naming traditions, for example, in the Nahuatl sense. Like, everyone wants an Indian name, bro. Everyone wants their Indian name. You know what I mean? And, I understand on the one hand the impetus to want to just latch onto one because you see your government name as a slave name that you're trying to dissociate yourself from because it represents the colonial tradition that you're trying to break away from. You know what I mean? And in your attempt to, indigenize, you latch onto what you perceive to be a native name. Okay. And I know I did this for sure with a name that hadn't I didn't understand what it meant. I just thought it was a cool name at first. You know what I mean? And I never told my other people to call me this name. I just use it as my Facebook handle for the longest time because I didn't want to use my government name anymore. So for many years, I used that as the name of my Facebook handle. And then when I started reconnecting, I understood that, first of all, this is, that's not how people were named. Okay. You didn't just, willy-nilly name somebody some type of shit. You know what I mean? And more importantly, the names, and this is in the Nahuatl tradition. I don't know. I'm not speaking on behalf of other traditions. I was just speaking on the Nahuatl one. Okay. But, more importantly, the names that are given are an enormous responsibility, dog. And if you're going to give yourself the name with a fucking enormous responsibility, you better be prepared to uphold and live that enormous responsibility that you have bestowed upon yourself. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm stating this shit about, coming to terms with the enormous responsibilities our ancestors demanded not only of themselves, but the ones that we inherit if we choose to follow their path as well. You know what I mean? Now, to be fair, I should clarify that they're not going to make value judgments. The Nahuatl, in their thought, is not like, this is good, this is bad. So whether you choose to pick up this burden or not, it's not like a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing that happens, okay? And it's going to potentially, it's going to be carried in our genetic legacy, meaning that the people that came before us carried a similar burden and chose to either go forward with it or not. And the people that come after us will carry a similar burden and they themselves will choose to carry it forward or not. And it's based, it's not like whether you choose to do it or not, it's not good or bad, okay? In fact, it's actually very liberating when we consider it that way because we understand that we're not carrying this burden alone. And what it is that we're going through, people before us have gone through, and endured. And people that come after us, our descendants, they were going to go through similar shit. And hopefully we prepare them in such a way where they themselves are able to endure as well, right? So in this particular sense, when it comes to me personally, let's go back to the ancestral teachings. And it's the idea that these people, our ancestors, the Nahuatl, were very highly directed and oriented people who viewed their actions as quite literal embodiments, homie, of the arrows, the arrows that were being shot from the sun. Okay. And that's why archery is like such a big, it's huge in Nahuatl culture, archery, right? For that very reason. It's quite literally the human embodiment of arrows being shot from the sun, right? And they use that metaphor to explain all of our actions in life. Like the same way that an arrow shoots towards a target is the same way our actions should always be oriented towards the target as well, okay? And if those arrows, you know what I mean, that they don't have a target, they're just wandering aimlessly, essentially, okay? These arrows, they need to have a directed purpose, which of course is our responsibilities. Like if you look at, a lot of the codices of the Nahuatl, you'll see they carry a lot of arrows, and that's what they mean, usually 3 of them, right? And that's our responsibilities. Like you have a responsibility that you have to, you have to do this, right? If you embrace it, okay? Remember, it's not like they're going to tell you have to. I mean, I'm not trying to be contradictory here. What I'm trying to state is like, this is the reason you're here. You find your purpose, you figure out your purpose, now go forth and accomplish it, right? And if you don't, probably not going to be in your best interest. We'll get to that here shortly, right? That's what I'm trying to state here, right? Now, I can't, to that end, state whether or not, because, unfortunately, although we walk with our ancestors, I never had a chance to meet one from 1,000 years ago, okay? So I can't tell you for sure whether they had individual hopes and dreams outside of the responsibilities that were either, inherited or given to them, right? Like when you call yourself a Tezcatlipoca or a Tlazotl, right? That's a responsibility that's either given to you or that you've accepted upon yourself, right? And I can't tell you whether they had individual hopes and dreams outside of that. Like, well, my mom really wants me to be a Tlazotl, but I always wanted to be a bard. I always wanted to be an author, a poet. You know what I mean? I want to be someone who writes the codices. Like, I don't know. I'm assuming because they're people just like we are here today. You know what I mean? But, what I do know for an absolute fact is that this mode of being was inherently anti-nihilistic. Just in what I told you, that should already be registering the idea that this lack of meaning and purpose, it doesn't register in this thought process. Okay. And this has honestly been one of the primary examples of that duality that I'm speaking of beauty and pain, right? There, like, if you ever see it, there's a lot of, for those of you who are listening only on those of you who are watching on YouTube, I have my hands interconnected between my fingers, right? And they're forming like a pattern. Sorry, I can't really show it that way. Right there you go, right there. Right? And the pattern is like, it's kind of like a yin yang thing. You know what I'm saying? But the yin yang in, Chinese thought, it implies dualism, and there's no dualism in Nahuatl thought. It's a monist philosophy. There's only one thing, right? As I've mentioned plenty of times before, but worth reiterating, the sacred, vivifying, animizing energy of Teot, right? So it's not a duality per se, so much as it's like a constant, it's a dance, bro, right? Of these dynamic pairs unfolding. And in this case, it's the duality of beauty and pain that I was discussing earlier, right? With the understanding that the Nahuatl, we're not inherently nihilistic people, bro. So what that means is then that on the one hand, it's great to like no longer be spiritually or philosophically homeless, okay? It's great to finally have an understanding of why I am the way that I am, and knowing that I am not strange for feeling and believing the ways that I do. Like, I walk with my ancestors, dog. I feel and believe the way that I do because that's what they felt and believed as well. You know what I mean? And I'm not alone in this. Like, there's plenty of other people who feel the same exact way, right? We're not there's nothing wrong with us for not being able to fit into this Western Christian society, bro. Like, as I mentioned before, that is a disease society, but I'll also emphasize and add now that indigenous cultures don't fare well in that Western Christian mold. Like, it is what it is, dog, right? So to not feel at home in that, it's not a bad thing. And for those of you that do, cool, man, more power to you, right? I'm just saying I never did. But now that I have a little bit more understanding of why, like, it literally genetically was opposed to it. And that's because the knowledge of my ancestors is within me, right? And I felt and feel and believe as they do because I am them, right? So it's great to have that, to have a home in that respect now, right? But on the other hand, it comes with a daunting realization, dog, that now there's something expected of you, of me, all right? Of you too, but in this particular case, like, it's of me, and I'm telling you, like, it's fucking, just to be completely honest with you, it's pretty horrifying, dog. And it's not horrifying because it's impossible what's expected of me. Like, fuck no, dog. What's expected of me is far, far more the route to success, and, not like a financial success, but like in the route to accomplishing what it is that I'm supposed to be doing is so much simpler than it was for my ancestors. Not only, our ancestors from 1,000+ years ago, not only because we're not as concerned with the generalities of survival as they are. Like, we don't wake up immediately like, okay, where am I going to get my next meal from? I know some of us do, right? But what I'm saying is, like, it's the portion of procuring it in many instances has already been resolved, right? And on top of that, I'm not dealing with a fucking potential faced annihilation, right? At least not like from a cultural scale. World War III could pop off at any second, the nukes could fly, and then all of us are facing that shit. So it is what it is, right? But what I'm trying to state is that it's not because it's impossible. And even if it was impossible, dog, that's what the lesson of Huitzilopochtli teaches us, right? Is that the smallest hummingbird can overcome that drives away the darkest night. You have within you, as long as you have the will and the willpower and the resolve, the ability, the knowledge to overcome any circumstances, regardless of how difficult and seemingly impossible it may appear to be, right? So nah, dog, it's not because, it's impossible. I have the strength and the survivability necessary to survive even the seemingly impossible because I walk with my ancestors and that's what they did, right? The reason why it's fucking horrifying is, quite frankly, dog, because of the commitment necessary to do so, okay? Now, I've always appreciated David Goggins, dog, but one thing that I've never been able to really vibe with was the anger and seeming self-hatred that motivates him. It's like for me personally, that's what it seems to be, okay? Definitely a lot of anger. The self-hatred for sure, like the person that he was, okay? And the anger and hatred towards the person that he knows he could become if he doesn't, stay hard, if you will. And this ancestral shit, dog, it's similar. It's similar, okay? In a lot of ways. but it doesn't come with the seeming anger and hatred that drives David Goggins, okay? And the reason why I state that is because he's on record himself of stating that he's like driven by this ontological battle with himself to prove his worthiness of existence when it's time to meet his God, which I'm assuming is the Christian God or the Abrahamic God for sure, okay? Which, I mean, don't get me twisted. It's admirable as fuck. The idea that if you were, let's assume that God did exist, the Abrahamic God, and the idea that when it's time for you to meet that God, that they're going to, reveal to you all the things that you did in life and all the things that you didn't do in life and, the guilt inherent with knowing that you can't go back and do better, essentially, right? And that's where this Goggins character is coming from, okay? And again, it's admirable, don't get me twisted, but that's never particularly motivating me, dog, because again, I walk with my ancestors, dog. I don't believe in the Western Christian God, right? And because of that, the fear inherent with meeting that Christian or Abrahamic God in general and feeling as though I did not, do as I could while I could, that doesn't really faze me, like at all. It doesn't motivate me in the slightest of ways. It doesn't scare me in the slightest of ways. Like it does not even register at all. Okay. And, the ancestral shit, dog, it's got none of that. It's pretty simple. Like it doesn't have none of that. Right. Again, as I mentioned before, whether we do it or we don't do it, doesn't matter. Right. It's not that it doesn't matter. Okay. Again, I don't want to sound contradictory. Like they're telling you, you should definitely do this. But if you don't, it is what it is. You know what I mean? Right. It's not a normative statement, okay? But what I'm also trying to tell you is that even the idea of not doing it wouldn't have registered because the way the Nahuatl society was structured, it was in such a way where everyone literally did their duty, like and it's not that it was without question, it's because of the way the civilization was structured and how smoothly it was ran. You know what I mean? They try to paint this picture of the Nahuatl being these barbaric people, but they absolutely were not, dog. They were highly civilized, highly cultured, highly educated people who had society written, down pat to such an extent that they never had to worry about, food, water, shelter, safety, and, their own individual pursuits and what it is that they've been relegated to. Because even if you weren't a leader, for example, you took solace in knowing for a fact that the leaders that had been chosen were not elected because they were wealthy and they were able to convince a bunch of fucking morons to vote for them, right? But rather because they had endured a grueling process to determine whether they were even capable of being a leader or not in the first place. That involved both physical and, not psychological in the sense of like torment, but like shadow work type shit, right? And it involves severe, like deeply introspective shadow work, as well as like grueling physical processes of, fasting and bloodletting and physical commitment to determine whether or not this person was actually worthy of being a leader, as well as the comfort of knowing that if they're not a good leader, they will be handled accordingly, right? So I'm not trying to give you the example like these people were just, mindless automata, because they weren't. They were just, fucking little drone worker bees, because they weren't. They were people who lived in a very highly structured, highly efficient society that didn't have to worry about, the things that we're currently worrying about, because their society it's just fucking better, dog. I'll just leave it at that, right? So when I state that, whether you do it or don't, it's like, it's not even going to register. It's like, do I want to do this? Do I not? No, this is what you do. And you do it because this is how the society functions properly, right? And you do it more importantly because it's a matter of cultivation, right? We got to cultivate a particular strain in our genetic legacy that can be passed down to the descendants who, in turn, will get to decide if that's something they want to perpetuate or not. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I say like it's an enormous burden to shoulder, but it's not one that I'm carrying alone. It's one that my ancestors carried long before I ever descended to the slippery earth. And it's one that my descendants will continue to carry long after I leave it, right? After I return to the Dosen Chan and the Tonatiuh Ichuan, right? Tonatiuh Ichan, right? The house, our collective home in the earth, and the house in the sun, right? Now, this is just one of the many reasons, Doc. Just one of the many reasons why they say that we are ancestors again. Because again, none of what we're doing, it's not new. It's existed long before we did, and it will continue to exist long after we do, right? And what this implies is, again, there is no inherent good or bad in our actions, just the overall quality of life we are leading, which again, as I mentioned, runs on a continuum of less ordered and best ordered. Okay. Continuum. Not a hierarchy. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, I put my hands up and down initially, but it's not up and down. It's side to side. Continuum, not a hierarchy. Right. And, a lesser ordered life, dog, is summated by one that's a terrible work of art. So here we get the aesthetics and their philosophy, right? While a well-ordered life is embodied by a beautiful work of art that is appreciated by others, like the pyramids, right? And it is that we have the ability to achieve that while we can. Whether we do or not, that's just whatever, dog. Like, yeah, you have the ability to do great things. Whether you do it or not, that's up to you to decide. And it's not going to be good or bad. It's not going to be like this ontological battle where you're going to meet an Aztec god, quote unquote, at the end of your life and have to answer for your actions. Like, nope, none of that's going to happen, right? You just have the opportunity right now, here and now, to, cultivate a better future for your descendants and make yourself a better life while you were here. Whether you do it or not, it's up to you. Just know that we have both the ability to do and not to do within us, right? And again, this is inherently anti-nihilistic because it's telling us, again, yes, you have a reason to be here, okay? You come to the slippery earth, Tlaltikpak, to remember that reason. And then once you do remember it, to work on it so that you can enjoy your stay here, right? And we have at our disposal infinite power to be able to do so. We are literally powered by nature, the sun, okay? With the energy that's required for us to achieve great things. And a critically important distinction then is that in the Western world that we're living in right now currently, that's not the case, dog, right? I don't want to say that we're not given a purpose because we are. And it's a terrible purpose. And it's going to be one that I discuss here shortly, right? But it's not one that you don't know because you've lived it your entire life along with myself and everybody else that's subjected to a capitalist Western Christian world. And that is consumerism. Like, you're given a purpose. Be a consuming consumer, right? Or a producing consumer. Produce something and consume something to keep this capitalist system going, right? What it is doesn't matter. Whether it's fulfilling or not doesn't matter. Get bread or get dead. That's it. That's the reason and purpose that we're given, which, in many instances is not sufficiently satisfactory for a lot of people, right? Now, again, you can take and it's not just, producing consumerism. It's also, finding a job, fulfilling any number of social roles, like being a husband, a father, a brother, a mother, a grandma, a granddaughter, whatever, dog. Okay. But what I'm trying to state again is that in many instances, a lot of these roles aren't particularly fulfilling. Okay. Not because they can't be per se, but again, because it's the default mode of living that we are just expected to pick up, right? There is none of the aforementioned. That's my, I was a native Spanish speaker, so sometimes it creeps out, right? The accent, right? But Spanish was my first language. It really was. I didn't speak English till I was like in first grade, I think, right? Anyways, what I'm trying to state here is that there is none of that aforementioned shadow work, okay, that is done with people to help them discover their reason and purpose. Just the expectation that we perpetuate the American dream. And for many people, that's not good enough, Doc. It's not good enough, right? And I know I for sure was one of them, okay? Now, don't get me twisted. Don't get me twisted. I am thankful for everything I have, okay? And what I get to do for a living. I'm fucking podcasting for fun, dog. You know what I'm saying? I get to teach philosophy as a living. Like, I'm very highly thankful for that. Don't get me twisted in any way, shape, or form, right? But there's definitely more in life that I am still admittedly longing for, okay? And because of that, in many cases, I still don't potentially, unfortunately, feel satisfied, right? And again, it's not because of my life circumstances. Like, I'm blessed. I really am. Right? You look around at the widespread suffering on the planet, and I know me personally, like, fuck, man, I'm so thankful for everything that I have, everything that I've been given, every opportunity that I've been given, right? If anything, I feel bad that I haven't taken better advantage of them and done more with them, okay? And that's more along the line of what I'm trying to talk about, okay? When I say there's more that I'm longing for, right? Like, I know at this point, I absolutely know what my purpose is. I've talked about it before. My purpose is to teach. I'm teaching now through this podcast. I teach for a living. Like, that's what I do. Okay. Whether, where that teaching takes place, where that teaching takes place is not really consequential. It's just, that's my role. Okay. But what I'm telling you is that the reason I feel unfulfilled is because I lack the commitment, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I lack the commitment that is required of somebody that is given the responsibility that I have been given, right? To be a teacher of the heart and the face is an enormous responsibility in the ancestral Nahuatl tradition. And I have been given that responsibility. And I've accepted that responsibility, but I haven't committed to that responsibility. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm stating of the unfulfillment. Okay. It's something that's entirely within my control. Okay. And, that's not good, dog. It's not good because that's where the passion to live that comes, to live that Goggin style life comes from. And, according to these ancestral ways, like you have a goal, I have a goal. The goal is right there, but I'm not shooting my arrows with the energy that's required. I'm not shooting on target. They're not oriented. They're not intentional. They're just, kind of meandering. Right. And, for a variety of reasons. And I'll talk about them here shortly, but I'll give you an example. Like, right now, I'm in the break of the semester. I'm recording this episode on January 3rd. So New Year, Christmas, New Year's, all that kind of shit, the Gregorian New Year, right? It's all past already. Okay. But, along with the end of the semester, since the last episode, I believe. I think the semester, I don't even know when I released the last episode. It doesn't matter. What I'm trying to state is that in general, the end of the semester, it's always a very bittersweet moment for me, dog. Cause on the one hand, like I'm excited that the semester's finally over. But on the other hand, it forces me to come face to face with the fact that, you know what? I probably didn't, I didn't give that class my all, dog. Like, that's one of the reasons why I have such a difficult relationship with students who always be like, oh my God, dude, I loved your class. You're the best professor ever. And I'm like, I appreciate that. And I'm sure you mean that, but I'm not a person that can't take a compliment. It's just that I know for a fact that I didn't do what I could have done to really, really, make this class something that would have really been a benefit to you. And that fucking hurts, dog. Like it hurts. It hurts to say, it hurts to admit, and it hurts knowing that the only reason why was because of a lack of commitment on my behalf. Like, don't get me twisted. I'm not trying to give you the impression that I just go into work and phone it in, because I don't. You know what I mean? I just know that I could still be doing so much more. Okay. And I have to come to face to face with that every semester, dog, and be honest. Right. And just accept the fact that teaching, again, it's an incredible responsibility. And I'm trying not to be hard on myself because I understand this is like a fact of life. I'm trying to be conscientious of this fact of life and work to overcome it. Because again, it's the strength and ability to overcome anything, right? Including this. And what this is in this particular case is that as time has gone on, I've admittedly, taken it for granted at times to the point where sometimes it just feels like I'm just here for a paycheck, dog, which again, that's fucked up, bro. It's fucked up for my students because they deserve better. And it's fucked up for me because I'm capable of better. You know what I mean? And again, in my defense, I'm not unique in this, bro. We all fall victim to the average everyday fallenness of just trying to survive the capitalist grind, okay? Of being so occupied with life, personal life outside of your work that you don't give your full, to what it is that you're supposed to be doing. And it's not even my work that suffered. It's this podcast too. Like I dropped 4 or 5 podcasts last year. That's not satisfactory, dog. It's an enormous responsibility. I really hate motherfuckers that complain, but don't ever offer any tangible solutions. Shout out Luigi, right? And that's me if I'm not dropping this podcast. Like, whether it's just one person or a million, I don't give a fuck. One person is enough to make tangible change in the way that they understand the world potentially, and they can go off and spread more knowledge to more people, right? Because each one teach one type shit. You know what I'm saying? And so it's got nothing to do with just work. It's the commitment to my own, what I'm trying to state is that the fact that I've been able to find work that's in line with my purpose on earth is a blessing, right? And where I'm fucking up is the lack of commitment that is, being put effort-wise into manifesting that reason for not personal gain, because it's never about personal gain, dog, but rather for collective gain. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have young kids that come to my class, dog. And it's one thing to teach them that, capitalism bad, for instance, right? But to not complete other things that help them genuinely understand. I'm not trying to brainwash them. I'm not trying to inculcate them. Come to your own conclusion. Here's what I'm telling you. This is the world that we're living in. This is the world that we can live in. This is the reason why we're living in the world that we're living in. And this is how we overcome it, right? And if I don't come to class prepared, if I don't podcast about it prepared, I'm not doing fucking ancestors or the descendants a favor. I'm pissing away essentially the opportunity that I've been given. I'm pissing away the purpose that it is that I've fucking, accepted as to why it is that I'm on this slippery earth. And that's where that painful insight that I was speaking on earlier came into fruition, right? The understanding that I need to be able to cultivate the sun's rays. And it's not just me, dog. I hope you understand that. I'm speaking to myself because this is the experience that I have. But if you're listening to this, I hope by this point you understand and you know that I'm speaking to us collectively. I hope that this resonates with you in such a way that you're like, you know what, dog? I feel that. And I'm probably along in the same boat because chances are you probably are, dog. Right? And chances are you're not satisfied with the answers that have been given to you by the Western Christian world, right? To just be as reductive about it as possible, which is why you're even listening to this bitch in the first place, right? This podcast, me, right? I'm the bitch. Literally, I'm the bitch because I don't have the commitment, right? To live my purpose, right? Not yet. I'm working on it, dog. The smallest hummingbird can overcome the darkest night, right? And I'll talk about the darkest night in this particular case here shortly. But the idea is that the way that we do that, again, we're powered by nature, dog. The sun gives us all the energy in this particular case to overcome the obstacles, no matter how seemingly daunting they may be, in order for us to fulfill the reasons for us being here, right? And when we don't, that's when the unsatisfaction of life starts to creep in, dog. That's when it starts to creep in, right? And the fucked up part, and this is where I was, this is where the conversation, so what I just talked about earlier was the lesson that I learned from the reconnecting. What comes after is a little bit of the conversation. The conversation, and I really appreciate it because people are just so nice, dog, for real. People are really nice. You know what I mean? And one of the things that was said was, maybe you're being too hard on yourself, which I get. And I really did appreciate that, right? But where I disagreed was in stating that you gotta be fully honest with oneself, right? Why the unsatisfaction of life is creeping in, but what you are doing to fucking allow that to continue going on. You know what I'm saying? Again, there is no good or bad. There's just our own conscientious, concerted effort at all times, right? Our own intentionality at all times. And, in order to, rather than address the things that are keeping us from, manifesting our purpose, if you will. I'm purposely being as vague as possible. I'll be a little more specific here shortly. But we gotta be honest with ourselves. We gotta be honest with ourselves, right? And we gotta set our intentions in such a way that we're able to even recognize, but also overcome the things that are keeping us or making us live unsatisfactory lives, right? And if we allow ourselves to fall prey to this predatory Western culture and the distractions that it provides to us by the bourgeoisie to quote unquote deal with the unhappiness inherent with living this allegedly meaningless life, now we fucked up, right? So, I'll speak on me, for instance, right? One of the reasons why I state that I, always feel like, fuck, dude, I could have done more, bro, is because I know, dog, like, dude, sometimes I get overwhelmed, I get stressed, and rather than, having the strength of the ego to remain fucking, adamant and focused on the task at hand, right? I fall victim to the mindless social media doom scrolling, the alcohol consumption, the fast food consumption, the petty interpersonal drama, and every other menial distraction that we create to keep us from fulfilling our responsibilities, right? And again, the elder that I'm learning from, he's the one that tells me, dog, like, we need to learn to cultivate the patience, the consistency, and the determination of the jaguar, as well as the impetuousness of the eagle. You know what I mean? And I'll give you an example that he gives. the example is that people always sign up for his classes, like always. And when they first sign up, they're very gung-ho, right? This is the ego right there. They're very gung-ho and they're ready to learn any and everything that it is that the class has to offer, right? But as time wears on and the drudgery of learning the ancestral ways continues to dredge on, people begin to lose interest. And I know for a fact, dog, because I was one of them. Like, one of the intentions that I've set out this last year was to not be that person. Like, I've really, really tried to commit myself a lot deeper to our ancestral ways this last year. And I'm only looking forward to continuing that as time progresses, right? But there's been times, dog, when I'm just like, fuck it, I'll skip this one or whatever. And it's like, no, dude, put down the fucking phone, pick up the textbook that's fucking teaching you about your ancestral ways. Put down the fucking, you know what I mean, the TV, the movie, and pick up the fucking lecture that's teaching you about your ancestral ways. You know what I mean? Put down the fucking fast food, pick up the ancestral diet, like all sorts of different things. You know what I'm saying? And it's really easy at first. It's really easy to do so at first because we're all excited, like, woo! You know what I mean? It's January 3rd. This is something that resonates deeply with everybody who celebrates the Gregorian New Year because everyone is making their resolutions. If the ancestral ways are correct, which I'm inclined to believe that they are, worst possible time to make a New Year's resolution because you don't plant seeds in the middle of winter when everything is dead and dying. You plant them at a time of rejuvenation, which of course is the spring. Okay? With that being said, doesn't mean that this is the whole shipetotec, and I'll talk about that, right? A little bit. But with that being said, the point here being is that, like, where's that Apple commercial that's going on right now? They call it Quitters Friday. Don't quit. We have a watch to help you. Like, bitch, you don't need to watch. You don't need a watch. You don't need a watch to help you with your goal. You don't need, motivation from David Goggins. You don't need this fucking grand ontological battle between you and God. You need to fucking grab yourself by te tienes que amarrarte los huevos, güey, right? That's like a Spanish way for saying you need to grab your fucking balls, right? And not like physical, actual balls. Because young ladies, you can fucking grab yourself by your testicular fortitude as well, right? Meaning your resolve, okay? And you need to fucking push forward, knowing what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing, okay? What am I doing? I'm teaching. Why? So that I can not only live a good life while I'm here, a more well-ordered life, but so I could potentially, hopefully, also seed a better and cultivate a better future for our descendants to come, okay? And sometimes I don't be doing that. A lot of the times I don't be doing that because I don't have the commitment. And that's what I'm stating. Like, just coming to terms with how truly, truly demanding, okay, the commitment is. It's horrifying. That's what I meant by it's horrifying. Like, the understanding, like, holy fuck, dude. It's so much more than just giving yourself a badass sounding Nahuatl name. You know what I mean? It's fucking a complete and utter radical lifestyle change that demands that if you want to be ancestral, you better be prepared to live as the ancestors did, dog. Okay? Anyways, the point of all that, dog, is that I know for a fact most people are, resolutely anti-nihilistic as well. You personally have unquestionably endured the daunting uncertainty of nihilism because you grew up in the Western Christian world too. And the Western Christian ideology inevitably collapses into nihilism. That's why Christians and Muslims, and I guess even Jewish people, because that's where it all originated from, that's why they're so, like, pro-death, dog. Like, they're literally looking forward to dying because dying is their salvation. You know what I mean? Like, that's very fatalistic, bro. It's very nihilistic, right? And we don't do that, bro. That's not us. It's unfortunate that we have to endure the wrath because those are the ones in power, and those are the ones that get to make the decisions. But that's not us, dog. We're not driven by this death drive, okay? And I know most people, dog, very, very few people are actual nihilists. In fact, if you ask me personally, there is no such thing as a nihilist. Because if you're an actual real nihilist, the moment you embrace that, you put an end to it. You yeet yourself out of existence because that's what true nihilism collapses to. Everyone else, just a fucking edgelord pretending otherwise in order to skirt the responsibilities that they have on this life, like I mentioned in the previous episode, right? Anyways, the reason why I state that then is that to emphasize that the problem is that's, this this Christian or this Abrahamic Western story, that's the default story, right? Which of course is what honestly was a driving motivator for me starting this podcast in the first place. And that was the understanding that I know for a fact, dog, I know for a fact that there's tension in almost all people, but there's a whole fucking book dedicated to it, dog. That is one of the most revered texts in the Western or in the Western tradition of philosophy, right? The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. I'm not telling you anything you've never heard before or experienced before, right? This tension that almost all people have, dog, between the reductive, materialist nihilism that we are told is the quote unquote unquestionable, story that we must abide by in light of scientific imperialism, and the seeming call from within or even above, even if that's what you believe in, that tells us like, nah, dog, there is more to life than this. There is more to life than this, right? And for hundreds of thousands of years, that call was easily silenced, because the name of the game was, as I mentioned before, it was just survival, dog. So once those ends were met, like our ancestors were good, if only even for the moment, you know what I mean? But once these needs for survival started to become satisfied more readily, right? And we progressed to the point of civilization where we are today, this longing itself has morphed and has continued to do so to the point where we now live in a time where everything is ready-made except genuine meaning and purpose. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what I was talking about earlier. You can go to the fucking grocery store, dog, and get dinner if you wanted to without ever having to step foot into the wild and doing the actions necessary to procure the food for you to, eat. But you can't do the same with like a happy life. They're going to give you a life, but it's probably not going to be a happy one, right? Unless you're fucking completely anesthetized to the reality of existence. And it's where the Nietzschean master slave comes in, where, the slave is completely, protected from the harsh realities of existence by this default Christian ideology that protects them from any sort of rational inquiry that could potentially lead them to realize how daunting the realization that we're living in truly is. You know what I mean? And, yeah, dog. So like, I know this, you know what I mean? And then I know, and again, that's what I'm talking about earlier. Like, I don't like to be the person that just says this, but does nothing to actually change it, right? And it always boils down to, well, that's what your purpose is. That's what your goal is. So what are you really doing? Like, what are you complaining about, right? It's like, you say on the one hand, bro, like, this world is diseased, you know what I mean? But what am I personally doing to change it, okay? And it's certainly not teaching in the capacity that I'm capable of, because again, I'm doom scrolling social media for fucking 8 hours a day. And that inactivity towards my goal is clearly frustrating me and making for a not so joyous experience on this slippery earth. So what the fuck are you going to do to change it? And again, I'm speaking in terms of me here, but obviously I hope you understand it's you too, right? And when it comes back to the story here, it's like, yeah, you're going to complain about, this diseased world, but how are you changing it? Okay. And that's what I was talking about earlier, with like the lack of a properly articulated, meaningful goal that we arrive to following this deeply introspective shadow work to reveal how we truly are as people and what it is that we should be doing with our time on this earth, with the intention of understanding that without a definitive goal, we're just wandering aimlessly, dog, without intention, right? And filling the void this causes with, bullshit dopamine hacking or dopamine boosting hacks rather, that, don't ever offer any real, genuine or lasting happiness, bro. And a better world is possible. I hate to just reduce it to that always, but that's what it is, dog, right? And the only way that we can achieve that world is if we start by being honest with ourselves, right? We got to be honest with ourselves and being deeply, deeply introspective, right? To find what it is that is, what are we here for, dog? We got to be honest with ourselves. You know what I mean? And we have to do so by, we got to broach some, I'm struggling saying this because I understand for me what it is I got to go through. I'll just tell you, dog. I got to deal with my brother's death right now. Like, I haven't processed it yet. You know what I mean? So like, I'm telling you, like, we got to broach these difficult waters, these torrential storms. And it's all metaphor for telling you like real shit. You know what I mean? And you got your own real shit that you're going through too. And we're not going to make a better place on this planet if we haven't dealt with those issues, right? If we haven't dealt with our inner Tezcatlipoca who is speaking to us from within, and in turn committed to being like Nahuatl, right? The ego that sacrificed itself without a second thought, simply for the greater good of its community by throwing itself into a burning fire, right? Like, I can't even imagine. I wish I could relate to you the way that my elder does to me. The story of Nahuatl, it's so beautiful, dog. But the idea is that, the peoples come together and they're trying to, they need a sun, essentially. Well, they need a source of energy. Okay. What a sun doesn't even register in their mind. It's just, they need a source of energy. And the only way that they can achieve this source of energy is by someone being sacrificed. This is where like the myth of sacrifice comes from, one of the places. And it's completely unfounded. It's a metaphor, dog. Right. And then, there's this one person that they initially turn towards, and because they're expected to be a leader, and this person unfortunately skirts away from the responsibility, right? That person goes on to become Ashalut, right? They run to hide away from the responsibility because although they were chosen to be the leader and although they wanted to be the leader, when it came time to it, they didn't have the strength, the fortitude to do what was necessary to be a leader, right? And then comes Nahuatl, Doug. And Nahuatl, without being asked, without any expectation of reward, simply entirely for the sake of sacrifice to its community, throws itself into a burning pit of fire, right? With the understanding that in sacrificing itself, it would be for the greater good of its people, okay? And I think about that all the time, dog, and how, in the text, they write out what happened, and it's a terrifying prospect, right? Just thinking about it. That requires a lot of courage and a lot of commitment. And in the story, it tells about how absolutely brutal the process of Nahuatl doing this was, right? It talks about the feathers being burnt and the pain that it felt of the searing flesh and all that kind of shit, right? But in the end, Nahuatl was ultimately reborn as the sun that gives us nourishment, the sun that gives us energy, the greatest sacrifice for the community, right? Is giving oneself to energize and nourish the people that come after you, right? Such a beautiful story. Just thinking about it, like it's just a little tear in my eye, right? So yeah, that's where I'm at in terms of this Nahuatl ancestral philosophy, right? As we end the Gregorian New Year, as we start the new Gregorian New Year. And again, I know it's where many of you are as well, okay? And I don't think that there is no happenstance in Nahuatl, and I'm fully committed to that. Okay. So because of that, there's a reason why we're all here where we are right now. Okay. It's the cycles of the sun, right? And moreover, it's a natural reaction, I believe, to living within the Western Christian world. So in terms of like our goals and our aspirations and our intentionality, I know if you, like me, currently feel a little bit aimless and lost without direction, perhaps, right? It's not by accident, Doug. Okay. And I think the mistake the mistake that a lot of us make is that, we're going to make a resolution because, again, the Gregorian New Year just passed, but I have to emphasize, dog, like living within the cycles of nature is probably far more beneficial than living within the artificial confines of what man-made society tells us, right? It's the Gregorian New Year for a reason. It's what the Gregorians wanted to be the New Year. You know what I mean? But that doesn't mean that it's in natural alignment with the rhythms of nature. And we are powered by nature. And because of that, we need to try to live in accordance with nature in order to fully optimize what it is that we're doing on this slippery earth, right? And that's why, again, an Apple Watch is not going to help you, dog. We failed to, we shouldn't make resolutions in the dead of winter, again, when everything is dying. We shouldn't plant seeds when the flowers and trees aren't growing, okay? This comes in spring, right? Because beyond the lack of discipline many people face, after the quitting Friday that the Apple commercial talks to us about, what we're dealing with is not the lack because there's an abundance, but not as strong of energy that comes from the sun, okay? So what I mean is simply the time for birth is not now. This is a time to be kind to ourselves, okay? This is a time to remember that the sun is currently still an infant. And as such, its dona its energy, it's not at its full force yet. Meaning if you're currently not feeling like, again, this is more of that capitalist bullshit brainwashing that we endure, dog. And another reason why I don't really fuck with David Goggins that heavy like that. This idea that regardless of how you're feeling, you must get up and push yourself through and you gotta grind till you die. And fuck you, bro. Right now is not that time. Right now is a time to be kind to yourself. So if you're feeling like, you're not contributing as much as you can or how much you feel like you should, it's okay. Be gentle to yourself. You know what I mean? It's still a powerful time. The sun is always powerful. But again, it's not the time to plant seeds, dog. That time will come in the spring with the celebration of Tlakashipehualitzli, right? Let me say that one more time. Tlakashipehualitzli, okay? The activation of the shedding in general, but of the human skin in this particular case, right? And that's what I was referring to earlier about Xipetotec, who has gone down in infamy as the alleged flayed god by the Spaniards who were looking to demonize our ancestors. But again, it's got nothing to do with that, dog. It's got nothing to do with that, right? It's about shedding our previous selves and becoming the newer version of ourselves necessary to accomplish the goals that we desire. Now, it's far more complex than this, no doubt, but I will discuss that when the time to celebrate Xipetotec comes, okay? For now, I wanted to shift gears and talk about some other shit that I've been thinking about in great detail since the last episode. And that is typo negative, and Peter Steele in particular, right? I've got a lot of things going on in my personal life at the moment. And in response to that, I've been listening to a lot of typo negative lately, right? Which in itself is honestly nothing new per se, because they've been one of my top 3 favorite bands for like over 20 years now, okay? But recently, a new layer of their music has emerged that I've really, really begun to appreciate, homie. And I'd say more than ever, but the fact of the matter is, I didn't even see or hear what it is that I'm listening to now until now, right? So it would be disingenuous for me to say than never, right? Because again, I've been listening to typo negative for 20 years now, right? And it's crazy because this music literally been there this entire time. Peter Steele died 17 years ago and the band hasn't made new music since. So it's not like they're just pumping out hit after hit. No, they haven't made music in almost 2 decades, right? So it's beautiful in the sense that what it is that I'm learning now from the music, it's literally been there in plain sight this whole time, been hidden in plain sight, right? And all that was needed was for me personally to get to a point of emotional awareness, to mature to a point of emotional awareness where I could understand what it is that Peter Steele and company were talking about when they were making their music. There is a lot of music by typo negative that is right on the nose, dog. It's just so fucking right on the nose, okay? So it doesn't require much thought at all whatsoever. Especially their older shit, okay? Which is honestly, okay, not surprisingly, I guess, what got me into them in the first place, right? I was heavily influenced by Peter Steele's previous band, Carnivore, which was it's just a thrash metal band, hardcore thrash metal band, right? So, it's only natural for those of you who know typo negative that I would have gotten into Slow, Deep, and Hard first because, after Carnivore broke up, Peter Steele formed typo negative and Slow, Deep, and Hard was the first album they released. And, it had a lot of music that probably was Carnivore music, if I recall correctly, right? What Peter Steele said in an interview. But you could definitely tell, it's nothing like what their later typo negative music would be like, right? And, when I got into typo negative, dog, it fit Slow, Deep, and Hard really fit perfectly for me, okay? Because again, I was 18, right? And I remember I was living in San Francisco at this time, and my homie, he wanted me to go check them out because they were playing in Oakland, and he wanted me to go out there with them to a show, and I was like, I don't even know who the fuck this band is, dog. I'd heard of them before. They had one of their songs came out on Beavis and Butthead, the Black, 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 #1. That one, it had come out on Beavis and Butthead, and it got favorable reviews by both of them. So I'd heard that one. And then, Freddy versus Jason, that was my shit, bro. That came out when I was in high school. And one of their songs, We Were Electrocute, was on the album. I think it was the last song on the soundtrack to that Freddy versus Jason movie, or towards the end somewhere, right? So I was aware of them. Okay. And I thought they were dope. I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool song. Right. But I never really got like that deep into them at the time. Cause at that point, I was a typical young fucking teenage kid, dog. And I was into, angry young male music who like hip hop, punk and hardcore. That was the shit that I listened to when I was younger. Right. So, the idea of listening to a goth metal band at that time, I was like, I don't really want to fuck with that. You know what I mean? But then my homie suggested, like, just check out this album, dog. This Slow, Deep, and Hard. And, perfect suggestion on his end. Because, again, it's not even a typo negative album, if you ask me personally. I don't care what Peter Steele says. You know what I mean? Like, me personally, I'm telling you, it's so different from everything else, right? Namely in that, I guess not. The musically, right? It's still got a lot of the thrash influence, right? It's like, ooh, 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 like that kind of shit, right? Which you don't find in later typo negative music too much, okay? But I guess a lot of the themes are still there, right? They're talking about anger, they're talking about confusion, and they're talking about alienation, and all the other things that young dudes face, which obviously resonated with me, right? And yeah, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, the reason why I keep emphasizing it's nothing like their old music is because this album actually had like a very detrimental effect on Typo Negative's career initially because of the content, right? Which is just so fucking lame, dog. Like, we don't watch a horror movie and try to hold Jason accountable for killing fucking teenagers. You know what I mean? We don't watch a fucking horror movie and hold it accountable for killing children. Like, it's a work of entertainment. Like, we recognize it as such, right? So to hold musicians accountable for the same thing is pretty preposterous when in many instances they're literally making film through music. They're creating a story through music, right? So to say like, this is exactly how you feel and you must be held accountable, unless they're like explicitly telling you like, this is what we believe. It's very disingenuous to do that. You know what I mean? Whatever the case, this was the early 1990s and even then the politically correct fucking PC culture was in full effect, right? And because of that, Typo Negative was accused of being white supremacists, and they were outright banned from Germany and many other places too that just wanted nothing to do with them, right? Because of that album, Slow, Deep, and Hard. And, it's fucking art, bro. Like, it's not an affidavit of who they truly are as a person. You know what I mean? But to be fair, they did have songs called like Der Untermensch, right? Which is like a rough translation of the Underman, which obviously is like a clever twist on Nietzsche's Overman. And it's basically a giant fuck you to poor people and those that Peter Steele considered to be quote unquote inferior, right? I scare quoted because like, you don't know that's how he really felt though. He's playing a fucking role. You know what I mean? He's making a fucking song. All right. And, right off the bat, you can see how they would, how they could absolutely be taken to be like as a white supremacist band, right? But that, again, really, genuinely, truly, it's just a giant disservice to their music, dog, because such a reading, rather, it takes away a giant component of what makes Typo Negative so amazing. And that is genuinely their bitingly black commentary and comedy, dog, right? They're like a highly comedic band. A lot of people don't understand that, bro. Right? And that's what makes Typo Negative so special to me personally and a lot of other people. It's how fucking funny they are. Right? Like, and I'm not even talking about the lyrics because the lyrics are funny too, but I'm talking about like the music, dog. Right? So much of their music is just deeply, deeply comical. And it's hard to explain to like a non-Typo Negative fan, but I'll just play you like a small clip, right? That I can't help but laugh every time I listen to it. So give me 1 second. While I pull this up, it's important to, I'm looking at the album right now. I'm putting it up on my phone, but you're not going to be able to hear this. I'm going to play it on it's not going to sound good, right? I'm playing it so I can hear it and I can sync to, with the video that I'll edit into later. This is the beginning of the song though. It's a pickaxe being grinded, right? And it's just funny to me because just pulling up the video, again, a little bit of the humor. I don't know. I think it's funny, right? But it's the album cover is a giant penis inside of a woman, right? And a lot of people are like, oh my God, that's so sexist. Maybe, right? But if it makes you feel any better, their follow-up album or one of the follow-up albums, the album cover was a fucking close-up shot of Peter Steele's butthole, like just open ego, his full butthole, right? So it's like, it's called The Origin of Feces, the album. So it's like, maybe a little bit of the comedic effect there, right? So anyways, the song that is in question here, it's called Zero Tolerance. And it's, again, this is what I mean, like, it's like a horror movie, dog. And the whole song itself is about this experience that he's having with a woman, okay? This woman that he was in a relationship with who is now cheating on him, that he's found out about it. And he's going to take it out by going to off both of them, right? The woman and the man who she's having an affair with, right? Again, like if you were to see this in a horror movie, you'd be like, wow, that was such a good movie. But for whatever reason, when it comes to music, we look at it and we're like, oh my God, that is so fucking violent and misogynistic and it should not be allowed. And maybe, dog, maybe, okay? So here's the point that I'm trying to get to that right here. This is a little bit of this is the, sorry, I got caught up in the music. But that's a little bit, that part right there of the, what I meant about the thrash influence, like that's straight up thrash metal, right? But this is the part that I'm talking about, like the music wise, right? So, like I can't even help but dance at this point. Every time I hear it, like the song goes from being so serious to literally being a dance song, like. It's literally like a dance song, yo. Anyways, so it goes from being like this hardcore like metal song to like a silly little dance song, bro. It's like that's kind of what I mean by stating like the comedic effect, right? And by the way, that's one of the songs that got me instantly hooked on them because of how silly it was, right? And it made me like an instant fan. I mean, I get it. I wasn't a fan because like it's like the violence against women. I was a fan because of how silly it was. Like it's a fucking horror movie in music form is the best way that I can put it. Okay. But, the whole point of this being, Doc, is this is the subtleties of typo negative that have really, really started to reveal themselves to me. Okay. And it is the growth from the Slow, Deep and Hard album to their final album, which I believe is Dead Again. I believe it's Dead Again. Yeah, it's Dead Again, right? With Rasputin on the cover. And it's just such an interesting trajectory, dog, right? And it goes from being this music that was so, violent and, whatever to, I guess the best way to put it is romantic, dog. It's like very romantic goth music, bro, right? Now, I'll speak more about how and why that happened when I talk about his relationship with women shortly, because it's sincerely what inspired this section of the podcast to begin with. But before I do, I would be remiss to not mention that, again, this is meant to be entertainment, not a fucking manifesto or an indictment, okay? Like, yeah, certainly it's an insight into his mind, the music, okay? But I'll continue to emphasize it's like a cheesy horror movie, dog, that's unfolding in the form of a song, right? In response to that song that I just played right now, Zero Tolerance, Steele himself, he's got an interview talking about it where he says something along the lines of, what would you rather me do? Would you rather me make a song joking about how I felt after a breakup? Because that's how I felt, right? And, make a song about it and the thoughts that resulted because of that breakup and, use it as a creative outlet, the music to process these thoughts and emotions? Or would you rather me actually pick up a fucking axe and go chop up my ex and her new lover, right? And it's just like, beyond being an insight into the infamously sharp wit and astuteness of Peter Steele, where he's bringing up, the seemingly impossible position men are put into on the one hand, right? Where we're accused of being these fucking violent psychopaths who refuse therapy. And on the other, he's being guilted for processing his emotions in a way that, is not considered culturally to be, culturally sanctioned therapeutic, right? Like, bro, not every man can or wants to even, for that matter, sit on a fucking couch and talk to some quack who has been indoctrinated, not with the skills to truly heal, okay, the issues that plague men, but rather with ensuring that they conform to the capitalist order and can remain good workers. Like, more of the fault of the Western Christian world that I personally feel was properly addressed in the ancestral tradition, right? And this is what Peter Steele's talking about, dog. So it's like, yeah, but if you want to be reductive about it, maybe he was this violent, racist, misogynistic homophobe who was spreading harmful white supremacist rhetoric. Or maybe he was just simply a regular fucking dude, who saw through the bullshit of society and its institutional brainwashing institutions that, whether it be a public school, a college, you know what I mean? Like, or any other socially sanctioned institution of quote unquote normalcy, right? Maybe he saw through all of that, dog. Maybe he was just a fucking working class dude, because before he was famous, that's what he was. He worked in the parks and recreations as a garbage man in, I believe, the beginning, and then he went on to start working like in the parks, right? And it's just the idea of this person who's working that life, and he has a full-time job before becoming successful musician, and he's upset with others who are not only living off his tax dollars while he's the one out there doing all the fucking shit necessary to survive and succeed. And, someone who, as time progressed, eventually grew as a person, as a man, to regret some of the choices that he made, right? When he made songs like Zero Tolerance or Der Untermensch, okay? Or maybe even fucking posing naked for Playgirl, which he did too, right? But the whole idea here being is like, for one, in defense of Peter Steele, like the growth inherent, right? With just being a person in general. Secondly, the fucking idea that men must adhere to this particular culturally sanctioned form of growth. And if you're not, then you're a bad person. Like, nah, dog, I don't want to sit on a fucking couch and talk to a dumbass therapist who's been fucking indoctrinated out of some Ivy League institution into what they particularly think the truth and reality is. Because all it does is ensure the capitalist order, right? And more importantly, the idea that his views on women, they're far more complex than one single song can ever encapsulate, dog, right? And that is where me personally, I am currently with my relationship with typo negative, right? And, not for nothing, I think I'm right? And I say that with confidence because not only is this rooted in plenty in the wealth of information that is available regarding Peter Steele, but more importantly, dog, because of my own personal relationship with the band itself. Okay. Again, going back to the very introduction of this, for the longest time, Slow, Deep, and Hard was the only typo album I could listen to. Right. I loved it. I loved it, dog. And, after seeing them, I would go on to listen to their entire discography. But for the longest time, that was really the only one I ever listened to. Okay. And don't get me twisted. There are dope songs, like on all their albums, okay? Like individual tracks that I love. My favorite one is We Hate Everyone on Bloody Kisses, right? Like, such a beautiful song, dog, right? In fact, like, as an aside, let's take a moment first to appreciate how incredible a song it is, right? In that We Hate Everyone. In that rather than kowtow to the woke mob of the 90s, typo negative doubled down with a giant fuck you by saying that we're offended, that... We're offended. Not that you think that we're racist or sexist or misogynist or homophobes, but that you think that we're superficial enough to hate on an individual group of people. Like, fuck you. We hate everyone equally, dog. All people are shit, right? What is the quote, the lyric from the song? Shit comes in all hues, right? I think that shit's, again, more insight into the infamously brilliant wit of Peter Steele, right? I wore on and I went through more life experiences. It slowly started making more sense to me, dog. And that's where exactly I'm at now when it comes to typo negative, right? And I hate to leave this thought unfinished, but the fact of the matter is I still haven't fully reconciled. I want to move on to the next part, which is the conspiracy theory element. As far as the conspiracy theory is concerned, homie, it's so stupid and fucking easy. Like, I'm not even going to discuss it in full detail. I can't even just thinking about it is boiling my blood, dog. And part of the reason why I won't discuss it in full detail is because it just happened. You all know which one I'm talking about. For those of you that follow on the gram, quick to post it, talking about government did that shit. I don't give a fuck. Like, they try to make us think that terror, this war on terror is necessary because humans are intrinsically fucking evil. And it's not that, dog. Actually, before I continue along with let me circle back to what I was just discussing with typo negative and the ancestral Nahuatl philosophy. And that is in response to another insight that I've made in regards to our peoples and our tradition and where we are. Los hijos de la chingada, to use the language that I've introduced before in the Labyrinth of Solitude from, I can't remember the guy's name. It's Octavio Paz. I think that's what it is, right? And the idea here is that how for the longest time, it's the propaganda about indigenous Nahuatl people, how they were barbaric, how they had sacrificed people, how they ate human flesh. None of that's real, dog. Santa Muerte. Like, that's not associated with the indigenous cultures, right? But I feel as though a lot of people falsely believe that we've lost in the wake of colonization because we feel wrongly, again, the machismo, that we were emasculated by the Spaniards. And because of that, we ourselves wrongly perpetuate a lot of the negative stereotypes about the ancestral Nahuatl people, because doing so, and I'm guilty of this, so I'm speaking to you straight up of my own experience, is kind of like, yeah, hell yeah, we come from badass people. Look, we used to sacrifice people and then we used to cut out their hearts and eat their flesh and all kinds of bullshit, right? Look at Santa Muerte, she's fucking badass. Like, that's our people. You know what I mean? And that is violently anti-indigenous, violently anti-Nahuatl, right? They were nothing of the sort as they are portrayed as. And they are nothing of the sort as what we portray them as, right? In an effort to recapture some of this perceived lost machismo, the perceived emasculation, right? And as we begin to reconnect truly, deeply with our ancestral ways, we realize how deeply valued women were in the ancestral Nahuatl tradition. They are the moon, they are the womb, right? They are the original gatherers and collectors of the knowledge that it is that we treasure to this day because their alignment with the astronomical cycles, okay? As far as the Santa Muerte is concerned, like it's an idea that was built off Mictlantecuhtli and Mictecacihuatl, right? Which are the alleged gods and goddesses or the god and goddess of death, but there is no death in the Nahuatl way, dog. It's transmigration, and the skeletons don't represent anything that it is that we associate skeletons with in the Western tradition. It's not associated with death. It's associated with transmigration, like the process of the living becoming something else, right? And as far as the relationship with typo negative is concerned, perhaps that's part of the reason why I'm starting to slowly be able to come to terms with the relationship that Peter Steele had. And that is because, you know, it's moving away from the misogyny and the machismo that I was indoctrinated with in the Western tradition and embracing more of the openness towards women inherent with the Nahuatl tradition of philosophy. Something that someone like Peter Steele had no problem doing because he had a healthy relationship with his mom and seemingly women as a whole. Now, with that said, as far as the connection to the whole attacks, the terrorist attacks that took place in Vegas, New Orleans, and the mass shooting that took place, another terrorist attack that took place in New York on New Year's, and the relationship there between the Nahuatl tradition, the answer is pretty simple, Doug. This idea of constantly trying to be bombarded with the idea that humans are intrinsically evil people. I've talked about this before, Doug, when I talked about the whole human nature is nasty, brutish, and short, but that's pretty convenient coming from some fucking asshole Hobbes who, at a time when people's life expectancy was like 40, 50, motherfucker lived till his 80s because he was a wealthy fucking bitch-ass motherfucker who gets privileged for no reason in the history of philosophy other than it helps perpetuate a narrative. And in this case, the narrative is that human nature is nasty, brutal, and short, and that if we don't adhere to some sort of social contract where we have a state with a capital S, not just like the state of Texas, but a government, the state, that is there to protect us and keep us safe, that humans are going to be at each other's throat, and that the only way that we can live a good life is to ensure that there's, you know, police and military present to keep people from fucking tearing each other apart. And I'm not buying it, dog. I don't fucking buy that. I'm not going to be gaslit to believe anymore that humans are intrinsically evil. There are bad people, no doubt about it. But the majority of people just want to get by, dog. We just want to live our lives, right? For those of you from around the world who look to America and be like, man, Americans are fucking stupid. Yeah, a lot of us are for sure. But even more of us are like, dude, what the fuck? Like, this sucks. We don't like it any more than you do. You know what I mean? Like, we want this shit to change. And a large part of that change is, affirming that, yeah, dude, human nature is not nasty, brutish, and short. Human nature is actually pretty fucking chill. And that majority of us can probably get along quite easily if we weren't so heavily propagandized, right? And so the relationship to the terrorist attacks then is going to be quite simple. Like, it's manufactured, dog. I don't give a fuck. This is what I mean, like, when you talk about, to me personally. You believe what you want to believe. I'm telling you what I believe. And I believe that the United States government is the largest perpetuator of terrorism around the planet, both foreign and fucking domestic, dog. Any terror that happened on the planet is closely related to the United States government. I'm not buying this idea that fucking, it's a spectacle, dog. It's a spectacle. You know what I mean? And we're being attacked and bombarded from all angles of the perspective, from the left, the right, to the far right with Alex Jones. Like, they're all playing a role, dog. And that role is to ensure that the play is upheld in order to perpetuate this myth that the state is necessary because humans would be at each other's throat if it wasn't. And again, I'm not buying it, dog. So going back to the terrorist attack, like, it's only 2 days. It's only been 2 days, right? But even then, already, like many people, the government did that shit, dog. Their government did that shit. Why? Because there is no war but class war, right? It's very easy to think of war dismissively as boots on the ground, right? And it can be that. It can absolutely be that. Don't get me twisted, right? But generally speaking, before it gets to the boots on the ground spot, what we're currently dealing with right now, long before the boots on the ground, is shit like poisoned air, and poisoned water, and poisoned food, and the lack of adequate access to clean alternatives and adequate health care to address the issues that arise from all of that. Again, shout out Luigi, dog. You might not agree with his politics, but he's done far more for the cause than any fucking nerd theory cell, quote unquote Marxist fucking jerk off masturbatory academic practice has ever done. Isolated incidents, right? They're trying to hit us again with the example of the car exploded. Everything was fucking destroyed except for the fucking ID of the person who committed the crime. That miraculously survived an explosion, right? The body is charred beyond recognition, but the paper and plastic managed to survive. Like, bro, come on, man. That's just being lazy at this point. You all already try to hit us with that, with the fucking passports that somehow miraculously survived being burnt from jet fuel. The Twin Towers collapsed and were burnt according to their fucking narrative because of jet fuel. But a piece of paper in the form of a passport miraculously survived to show that somehow it was these fucking peoples from across the ways that were jealous of our alleged freedoms and wanted to fucking vent that frustration by attacking the country. Like, that's so obviously fake and manufactured, dog. And the fact that they're even trying it is either a sign that we're either, as a society, that fucking dumb because the inculcation and the brainwashing that we've endured has reduced us to that level, or they just are literally could give a fuck less at this point and just being so blatantly obvious with what they're doing because they feel as though no mobilization will ever occur. Whatever the case, dog. I don't like to be a harbinger of, doom, but I'll take the positive out of it. And the positive is that right now, currently, just from my, small interactions from shit that I see on social media, it seems as though like a collective class consciousness is slowly starting to emerge, dog. Right now, you have it going down with the whole H-1B shit happening with Tesla and Trump even, right? Where you have the right wing who seems to be even slightly in agreement with the left wing in that Elon Musk is a fucking bitch. Straight up. You know what I mean? That he's nothing more than a fucking puppet, an actor, a bitch-ass trust fund kid who is playing a role that was selected by the bourgeoisie in order to import cheap labor into the United States of America, not for fucking progressive values, but rather to devalue the fucking aims and the value of the American worker. And, so on the one hand, you have conservatives saying that, and on the other hand, you have the leftists who are saying shit like Elon Musk is a bitch because he's a billionaire and fucking all billionaires are bastards. And it's just this weird co-merging between the two that honestly gives me a lot of hope. Like, I I'll qualify it with the negative, and then the negative is it's going to get far worse before it gets better, dog. Like, history has showed us that it's going to lead, it's not going to end well because, you know, assuming that history is going to follow the same trajectory as the past, given, you know, the structure of the European caste system, which we're 100% beholden to still to this day, there's only so far before the peasantry, the slaves, the bourgeoisie will revolt, right? And when the revolt genuinely happens, it probably won't be very, you know, it won't be very pretty, right? So that's the negative. But the positive that I'm trying to take away from it is that somewhere in between all of that, we're seeing like a bridge begin to emerge where the divide in the chasm can start to become, the divide and the chasm can begin to become overcome. And the two sides that have been ripping at each other, ripping this country and the society apart from its seams, are perhaps slowly giving the path towards coming together to recognize that it's not about left or right. It's about the fucking proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, right? So there's a little bit of positive spin in the sea of bad, right? Now, speaking of proletariat and bourgeoisie, the next part that I wanted to get to was the movie element of the podcast, which it's a Christmas movie. I was going to do a few of them. I just saw Nosferatu a couple days ago, dog. I'm so excited to talk about it, but this bitch is already long enough. So I'm going to cut the Nosferatu off for today. I'll talk about it in the next episode. And instead, I'm going to focus strictly on one of it's a Christmas movie, and it's not Christmas season anymore. But it's such a good movie, dog. And I saw it during the Christmas season after the last episode of the podcast. And I was like, damn, I can't wait to talk about this bitch. So here we are, right? One of the reasons why I watched it was because, it has Ash from The Evil Dead. Bruce Campbell, right? Bruce Campbell's in it. And, it's a zombie movie. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, a little bit of Evil Dead action, right? But it's nothing like The Evil Dead. The only thing that it has like The Evil Dead is that Bruce Campbell is in it, right? And it's got zombies. But he plays a complete different character, and it's got nothing to do with like Deadites, the fucking Book of the Dead, and none of that kind of shit, right? Let me make sure that's the actual name of the movie. I'm pretty sure it is, but I could be conflating it with Black Christmas, the movie with that woman from the 1970s, Romeo and Juliet. She passed away recently. Damn, I forget her name off the top of my head. But she passed away recently, and she was in another Christmas classic movie, a horror movie. And that one might also be called Black Friday. Yeah, so the one I was talking about from the 70s, it was actually remade recently, like in the 2000s. And it's not bad, the remake, but it's nowhere near as good as the first one, the original. That one's actually called Black Christmas, right? And the woman's name, the actress's name was Olivia Hussey, right? Anyways, the one that I was talking about was the one that I want to focus on is Black Friday. That's the one with Bruce Campbell, okay? And this is the precursor into what I'm going to finish the podcast off with, which is Marcuse. But I couldn't fit. This is the flow of the podcast moving forward, dog. Nahuatl, personal thoughts and reflections, conspiracy, movies, and then a little bit of philosophy at the end, right? So as far as the movie is concerned, again, I know it's a Christmas movie and it passed or whatever, but you know, I was excited to share it, man. And that's because, again, I really started to enjoy Christmas movies for one, and also because Christmas movies, they run on the spectrum, dog. And the last episode I talked about like a different end of the spectrum, and this one is a complete opposite end of the spectrum, right? Like, I don't know, there's just sex and violence, and more so with the actual story and with making a cultural critique, which I absolutely appreciated, right? Again, one of the biggest knocks on horror movies in general is that they're perceived to be shallow and superficial, okay? And the genre as a whole is perceived to be shallow and superficial, and it's perceived to not have much to offer in the form of analysis. But I maintain that that's just not true, dog. It's not true, right? And that's not just me stating this, by the way, okay? For those of you who are film dorks, Martin Scorsese, director of Goodfellas, Casino, etc., he himself is on record as saying that horror is unfairly regarded as B and C level cinema, when in fact, when it's done correctly, he specifically cites one movie I can't remember, and director, but the other one being Scanners by David Cronenberg. He says that's a beautiful movie, man. And this film can be as equally on par with those that are considered great, quote unquote, by film critics, but you're just unfairly dismissing it because it's a horror movie, right? Now, to be fair, Black Friday is no fucking Casablanca, okay? I'm not trying to give you that impression. But it did do like a really amazing job of demonstrating why horror is a great genre for many reasons, okay? And in this particular case was because of the cultural critique, right? Now, I'll qualify it by stating that horror movies in general, following specifically George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, they've come to take on a decidedly anti-capitalist critique. So usually whenever you watch a horror movie, show or whatever, it's generally, filmed at least and should probably be understood. I'm not trying to say you should or should understand it this way. I'm just saying it's largely understood as a critique of capitalism, all right? Which is funny because Marx himself was actually deeply inspired by the horror genre. Like there's, in his biography, tales of him reading horror stories and science fiction stories, not just for entertainment, but also to get like viable parables to be able to relate the relationship between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, right? Between the parasitic working class and the proletariat, if you will. Okay. There's this really great article where I got the bulk of this information from, if you want to read it on your own, because I'm not going to focus on individual specifics, but I'm just that which is going to help me highlight my point about the movie I'm talking about. It's called The Zombies of Karl Marx, the horror in capitalism's wake, right? And the basic idea is how the relationship between vampires, capitalism, and zombies was a seemingly naturally unfolding phenomena that Marx barely missed out on, given that, our contemporary understanding of zombies didn't come until well after his death, right? But despite that, he obviously had access to the stories. He grew up in fucking the Gothic era Germany, dog. And he had the access to the stories of vampires, for instance, right? Which at the time served as more than a good enough metaphor for Marx, who wrote shit like capital is dead labor, which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor and lives the more labor it sucks. And the vampire thirst for the living blood of labor, the vampire being the bourgeoisie, and that the vampire will not lose its hold so long as there is a muscle, a nerve, a drop of blood to be exploited. But that's all Marx writing. You know what I'm saying? That's deeply influenced by the horror genre. And so with that understanding, we can see how vampires, at least at that point, but then inevitably morphing into zombies for reasons we'll see here shortly, and their continuous need for possession and consumption, and as resembling the need for possession and consumption as resembling this ravenous thirst of capital and the thirst that it conjures up in those who are under its spell, right? So the author of the title, the author of the work, his name's Tyler Malone, and he tells us that, like Dracula, a capitalist grows in strength through their predation, a strength which grows in proportion to their victims' weakening, right? In this case, the working class. The parasitic working class is only getting stronger because they are fucking feeding on the vital energy and lifeblood of the working class, dog. So, to this end, Marx tells us that capitalists gets rich, the capitalist, right? I'm trying to not use gendered language because there are female capitalists, right? Marx tells us, he only uses it in terms of he. Marx did, right? But I'll use they. Marx tells us that the capitalists, they get rich, not like the miser, in proportion to their personal labor and restricted consumption, the working class, you and me, right? But at the same rate that they squeeze out labor from others, compelling the worker to renounce all enjoyments of life, like a vampire, right? And this is literally the exact premise of the movie that I'm talking about, Black Friday, right? I'm not going to spoil it. I'm just going to give you the brief synopsis of the plot if you want to watch it. It's on Amazon Prime, right? But it's a film that's predicated on the premise of, and this is to quote Malone, the self-replication of capitalist consumerism, consuming consumers who must continue the pattern of consumption and the enslavement through this replication, right? So, as you can gather by the name, this movie takes place on Black Friday in a toy store, okay? And the entire beginning is dedicated to the characters coming to terms with this very fact. Like, bro, what the fuck? It's Thanksgiving. Why are these people so ravenous to come shopping? And more importantly, why are we even here working in the first place? We should be at home spending time with our families and appreciating this brief moment that we have to do so. The vampiric class will not let us. They will fucking suck every ounce of enjoyment and fulfillment of life possible in the name of extracting capital and resources from us, dog. That's why we have Black Friday. And what's worse yet is they've created a fucking parasitic class of their own. And that is the consumers who will gladly be lined up on Black Friday waiting to get the alleged deals, at the expense of the working people who are there that have to deal with their bullshit, right? Now, the answer to why the fucking, in the movie, why the people are there shopping is pretty simple, right? And that is that they are no longer people, dog. They are quite literally the living dead who have been programmed, essentially, to do the bidding of an external entity. There's the Spanish as the first language accent coming through again, right? And that external entity in this particular case is capitalist consumption, right? And this capitalist consumption, the need to consume shit, has basically replaced our conscious thought with its own desires. And that is to buy shit, essentially. Produce shit and buy shit. That's what I meant earlier by producing consumers, right? We are consumers who produce. So here, this is where Malone, he goes off to, I was giving you a synopsis of the movie, but I'm going to go back to the article of Malone. He breaks us off with a little bit of horror history, tracing the roots of the modern zombie to its origination in Haitian culture. And the reason being is that he wants to emphasize how when our current iteration of zombies first came to be, they're not what we understand them to be today, right? They were understood as being the dead, quite literally, who were reanimated under some external force, in this case, the spell of a voodoo doctor, right? Who, is using them essentially for free labor. Okay. And obviously you can't separate the political context from the story. So in this particular case, like it's the story, the Haitian zombie of an enslaved people who are horrified at the prospect that even after death, there would be no reprieve from their servitude, right? The idea is like, at least once I die, I won't be a slave anymore. Just imagine the fucking conditions that the Haitian slaves were going through, where they created a zombie to express their fear of being forced to work even after what they would consider to be their reprieve in death, right? And that's why in these early iterations, the fear wasn't necessarily of becoming a zombie because you were bitten by one or infected by some external entity per se, like we understand them today, but rather of being reanimated after death and being forced to continue working against your will. This all changed, okay? This whole narrative changed with the release of the quote-unquote Shakespeare of zombie cinema. And that is, of course, Night of the Living Dead by George Romero, in which the zombies switched from simply being these dead slaves to flesh-hungry and bloodthirsty beings who could spread the affliction through scratches and bites. And that the only way to stop it was to kill the brain, right? You kill the brain, you kill the ghoul, okay? So to that end, Malone is telling us that zombies now become, they morph into this vampiric entity, right? Not only in their desire for human flesh and blood, but in their ability to convert others to be like them as well, right? So the biggest difference then between the modern zombie and the Haitian zombie would be that the biggest difference between what our traditional understanding of vampires is and the modern understanding of a vampiric zombie is that, unlike a vampire, these zombies that we understand today, they're subject to earthly decay, but most importantly, they lack agency. They don't have the ability to think critically, which is going to be a huge topic when we inevitably get to the section on Marcuse, right? And so when it comes to this metaphor, if you will, of zombies and Marx and capitalism, Malone is telling us that this kind of zombie is more in line with what it is that Marx had in mind when he was speaking of vampires, capitalism, and the relationship between the two, as demonstrated by his quote that capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt, right? That's the Marx quote, right? The idea here being is that like the zombie animating itself out of the grave, right? It's covered in fucking dirt, but here it's covered in blood and dirt, right? The zombie, because of what it's been exposed to, right? And I know, is evidenced by, in the movie Night of the Living Dead, George Romero's decision to film it at a shopping mall, right? They chose the shopping mall like specifically, okay, for a reason. And again, if you haven't seen the film, the basic idea is like there's this attack from like a plasma, a parasite from outer space that it infects humanity, okay? And the protagonists of the movie, they choose the mall initially, like they run to the mall for safety under the assumption that it's going to have everything that they need to survive. It's going to have food, weapons, etc., right? Which on the surface, it makes sense. And initially it is, right? And throughout the whole movie, there's only really one character who's ever thinking to themselves like, this is not a good idea. It's the woman, right? She even states like, she even states in the movie like, you're hypnotized by this place, all of you, right? You don't see that it's not a sanctuary, it's a prison, because they're literally trapped. They built like a wall and everything. They're trapped inside the prison, right? And of course, as it turns out, she's correct for, whatever reason, because for whatever reason, the zombies inevitably descend upon the mall itself, right? And obviously, as like a meta viewing, we understand this to be an obvious necessity that it's a zombie movie. The zombies obviously have to go where the characters are, right? In order for the film to continue progressing, okay? But in the film itself, they give a reason, because they're wondering like, what the fuck? Why are the zombies coming here? Like, not even like one or two, like everyone is coming to the mall. Like, what the fuck? What is it about the mall? I thought we'd be safe here, right? And, the idea is that they inevitably come to the conclusion that the reason why they are ascending there is it's probably an instinctual thing in their mind that has remained despite the lack of agency. And it's something that reminds the zombies of an important or happy place that they had prior to being infected. It's essentially suggesting that they are burdened by these enduring memories and innate desires to consume and produce, right? And rather than having and no longer in possession of the rational capacity to stop that, right? So because of that, they are fully driven now by this innate desire to satiate an insatiable appetite, okay? So human flesh, shopping, consuming, etc., okay? And unlike the Haitian zombie then that was reanimated to work even after death, the capitalist zombie is forced to continue their insatiable desire to consume. And this is where Malone tells us that while we may enjoy buying things, and that while we may even like love our collected knickknacks, a part of us understands deep down that there's this always hidden, always already terror that is lurking in the shadows of capitalism, in the shadows of consumerism, and in the shadows of consumerism, right? Or commercialism rather. And that is the knowledge that inevitably the joy of indulgence will leave us. And what we're going to be left with is mindless consumption that we are hoping will fill the void that we have within us, the void that I was talking about earlier. It's all connected, dog. It's all connected, I promise you, okay? It's a long episode, but I promise you it's all connected. The void that I was talking about earlier when I said that, I feel like I'm not committed, and that lack of commitment is causing like pain in my life. Not like physical pain, but like a spiritual, I don't want to use spiritual because I don't believe in spirit, right? But like an existential pain, I guess, is a way to state it. Not because I'm afraid of like death and dying, but because I know that I'm not committing myself to a level that is necessary to satisfactorily fulfill the enormous responsibility that I put on myself, right? And this is what they're talking about here. This is what they're talking about, right? Most people, rather than having the ability, or not because you don't have the ability, but because the access isn't readily available. It's fucking expensive to get mental health treatment, right? We don't have public schools that teach about the heart and the face, that, deal with shadow work and trying to make people be good people from within, right? We don't have access to any of that, okay? And what we're given instead is these vacuous fucking placatory, masturbatory practices that benefit capitalism in the form of social media, doom scrolling, drugs and alcohol consumption, fast food consumption, etc., like I mentioned earlier, right? Or in this particular case, retail therapy. Just buy shit till you feel happy. And you're never going to feel happy, right? Because that's not how humans work. He doesn't talk about this in the article, but this is the hedonic treadmill, right? It's something I talk about in my classes. And I'm actually really looking forward to introducing it moving forward using this, right? But it's beyond the scope of the episode of the podcast, of this podcast, right? But the basic idea is that we're creatures of habit, and we adapt to shit very easily. And the point being is that no matter how much you buy, inevitably the alleged happiness, this happiness that we've been brainwashed to believe is happiness, will wear off. And what we'll be left with is this void again that we're going to continuously seek to, fill by just consuming more shit. And it's just this vile, violent, horrifying, vicious cycle that you're probably not going to escape unless you learn what actual, genuine, real happiness is, right? And it's exactly what the capitalists don't want us to escape, because doing so is inherently anti-capitalist. So in going back to the Malone article, he tells us that the zombies, as a Marxist metaphor, now becomes this tripart image, right? And that is that the zombie is simultaneously three things. It is first and foremost capital itself, okay? Which lives only by consuming the living labor of the capitalist worker. Secondly, it comes in the form of the enslaved living laborer who becomes quite literally a zombified living dead. I'll explain that a little bit here shortly, okay? And then the third part is it manifests itself in the everyday consumer who, being trapped in the system, consumes in response to the thing that is consuming it, capitalism, thereby continuing the cycle endlessly. That's what I was talking about earlier, when we get caught up in this fucking hedonic treadmill with seemingly no escape, right? There is an escape. Conveniently for me, it's studying philosophy, right? That's why I'm trying to teach this shit, dog. They don't teach it in public school. They want us to be happy. They want to sell us their fucking, their artificially created forms of happiness to generate revenue at our expense, right? And maybe some of you will be happy with that. But I very highly doubt it, especially if you're listening to this podcast. What we really need is honest, genuine, sincere, insightful, deeply introspective, understanding of who we are as people, which can only be given to us via philosophical discussion, right? Now, as far as the tripartite form of the zombie, that's exactly what's happening in the movie Black Friday. Again, I'm not going to spoil it. Like, I'm just giving you the premises because I would love for you to go watch it so that we can have something to relate on, right? But what's happening essentially is, I'll talk about the first one, the first of the three, right? You have this giant mega toy corporation that is represented only through, at first, a voice and inevitably characters, that's Bruce Campbell and another guy, who represent upper and mid-level management that is ruthlessly driving its employees to generate revenue at all costs. There's a fucking zombie apocalypse unfolding, and these motherfuckers are like, we gotta keep the store open and we gotta make revenue. Like, that's the only thing that matters, right? The second way that it represents itself is through the lives of the workers themselves, right? Because especially at the beginning of the film, but the whole, again, that's what I'm talking about. Like, it's not really a zombie movie. It's got great special effects, but it doesn't focus primarily on the zombies. It's focused on the cast. It's focused on the story, right? And a large part of the story is dealing with the characters the workers themselves, that are shown as the film progresses to be hopelessly bleak and who are, they're living these hopelessly bleak lives that are very unfulfilling. Okay. And then, the third part is, that's the zombies, the average everyday consumer who, they don't even give them a name. In the movie, they don't even have names. Like, oh, there's Bob. Like, no, they don't even have names, dog. Right? They're just this faceless, there's just this, nameless mass of people. It literally becomes a giant mass, right? That's getting subsumed into this mindless heap of bodies that are looking to do nothing more than infect more and more people with this contagion. They cannot buy enough. They need more. And in the way that it's represented is by infecting more and more and more people till it becomes like this giant fucking, again, spoiler alert, I'm sorry, right? But it's a great movie. And in my mind, that's the real horror here, right? Is that, zombies are cool as fuck, But realistically, dog, they're kind of an afterthought, right? They're an afterthought to the existential dread inherent with a life that has been stripped of any seemingly meaningful purpose and value. One that has been replaced instead with this insatiable desire to do nothing more than consume artificially stimulated goods that we are told will bring us happiness. So speaking of pinko commie bullshit, this is where we will end the third and final section of the podcast, discussing in further detail some more Marcuse. I say in further detail, but it's really just detail I should be more specific in stating, because the fact of the matter is, dog, I got through like 1.5 pages. I have 13 pages left of writing, and I got through 1.5 pages of the section on Marcuse. It's, again, such a dense and critically important, in my opinion, philosophical text that I just don't want to rush it. I don't feel obligated to give a haphazard summary just for the sake of condensing the material into a digestible 1 hour episode of the podcast. Like, it's important. Like, it really is. And in line with everything that it is that I have been discussing in terms of not just, it's important to me, right? Because this is my purpose. And it's important for the community, you and everyone else, because this is the organic intellectual shit that I'm talking about, where just because we don't have access to the gate-kept knowledge and the privileged knowledge of academia doesn't make us lesser than. And more importantly, in my humble opinion, it makes us better than the academics, because we're not brainwashed. I'm just going to keep it simple, dog. Academics have been brainwashed. That's the biggest beef that I had with my doctoral program and why I inevitably ended up dropping out. They wanted to mold your boy into an academic, dog, like in the sense of they didn't, it was all, I've talked about it before, so I won't get into further detail into it now, but they wanted to turn me into a fucking cog in the machine with their whole change the system from within bullshit. And it's like, no, the system never changes from within. The system changes you. We all know that. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not going to allow you to sit here and talk this big game about, the evils of colonization and the importance of decolonization. And when it comes time to actually, put theory to praxis, action, you ain't about it. Like, nah, dog. And that's why these academics, they would look down on these ideas that I'm about to talk about here shortly, but it's on purpose. And this is in line with what I'm going to be discussing here shortly anyways. But this is like a quick little introduction to it. And the reason why it's on purpose is because when they're able to shut down the discussion or frame it only in terms of the language that they have legitimized and approved of, then they can control the outcome of the argument, which is conveniently always in their favor. Who is there? Who is they? It is the academics and the institutions that academia upholds. It is colonialism. It is capitalism. And because of that, the they, the them, the they are, right, is the fucking capitalists at the end of the day, dog. The people who fund the schools and the universities, who, tell us what it is that we're supposed to believe to be as true. And if we disagree, then we're, unintelligent, irrational, or at worst, fucking conspiratorial. You know what I mean? And it's like, nah, dog. They call us fucking homophobic, transphobic, racist, sexist, misogynistic, and all the other bullshit isms and phobes that they've come up with to try to, shut down conversation. And it's just, that's exactly on line with what it is that the section that I'm going to be discussing of the article of Repressive Tolerance by Marcuse is going to talk about, right? So, with that in mind, again, if you've had a chance to peep the previous episode, this will be, it's just a continuation of where I left off, basically. And if you haven't, if you're picking this up as a standalone episode, I would encourage you to go check out the last episode if this is something that you're interested in and, contextualizing in terms of the greater conversation that I'm going to be having here shortly. And if not, that's cool too. Maybe you already know this article. Maybe you've read Marcuse on your own and you're familiar with it. You just want to get my own personal take on the matter, right? That's cool too. As for me, right? Again, for those of you who are, I guess I got through like 2 pages, but still not a lot, given the amount of material that it is that I'm going to be discussing here shortly, right? But for those of you who want to follow along, I'm on the second paragraph of page 4, right? So like if you're reading along and shit, which once again brings up an interesting point that certainly separates Marcuse from a lot of his postmodernist contemporaries. And that is that he is going to insist on the existence of an absolute truth. And unlike most philosophers who consider this to be an abstract, detached, or perhaps even scientific process, Marcuse is going to tell us that this truth can only be quote unquote discovered and ascertained through learning, by learning and through comprehending that which is, that which can be, and most importantly, that which ought to be done for the sake of improving mankind, right? So again, this is a very common theme in Marxist thought, and it's the point of, or the theme here is that it's the point of philosophy not to explain the world. That's the Marxist quote. At this point, philosophers have only explained the world. That's masturbatory bullshit, doc. That's not the point of philosophy. The point of philosophy is to change the world, to change the material conditions, right? And again, shout out Luigi, dog, who's done so much more for the cause than a lot of these fake woke fucking academic dickheads who just, recite theory with no actual action, and then, try to judge the rest of us because you don't agree with his politics. Like, it's not a matter of your own petty personal politics, dog. It's a matter of the praxis, the actual action. You know what I mean? And with his action, he has laid the foundation for far more in the realm of ideas than any fucking theory cell ever has, right? Now, again, going back to my doctoral days, I want to circle back first to Marcuse's statement of telos, that telos is the tolerance of truth. Sorry, I'm fumbling my words here. Give me a second. That the telos of tolerance is truth. I'm trying saying that 5 times fast again, right? The telos of tolerance is truth, okay? Again, going back to my doctoral program, I used to get a lot of shit back in the day, dog, for suggesting that censorship was not a good thing, regardless of how outlandish the opinions of the people that it is that we are discussing with potentially may be, right? And, obviously academia is comprised of very progressive, quote unquote, liberal peoples. And because of that, when you state shit like that, they don't necessarily receive it too kindly, okay? The extreme left, right? They definitely hate this because they see it akin to facilitating and enabling those that condone hate speech, right? Which, again, I understand the sentiment, but I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it at all, actually. And not only do I think it's incredibly wrong, but I think that sentiment is dangerously harmful. I really do. I understand why some people think that allowing outright free speech with no encumbrances at all is itself dangerous. But I am of the opinion that it's equally dangerous to censor people. And maybe they're both correct. And maybe there's a synthesis between the two that needs to be understood before we can even continue along this discussion. All I know is that me personally, I don't think that censorship in any form ever is the correct solution, right? And I'm certainly not alone with this. Marcuse is going to agree with me for reasons you'll see here shortly, right? And again, it was so easy for these peoples that I was in my doctoral program to dismiss my insistence on this as somehow due from me personally benefiting from the very structures that they perceived that they were critiquing because of, your boy's a little light-skinned, bro. You know what I mean? And realistically, the only reason why is because I don't really see the sun that much anymore now that I work inside all day. I'm not, I don't work outdoors. But I got a little tan to me. Your boy's got a little skin color. You know what I mean? But they would see that and they'd be like, oh, yeah, and you're straight. You got fucking white passing privilege and you're fucking straight and all this kind of other bullshit. And that's why you have no problem with people speaking their mind. And it's like, no, that's not why. That's definitely not why. But again, I could see why you're trying to reduce it to that, because as soon as you start throwing out these words, it starts narrowing the game and the amount of moves that are possible to people to try to circumvent that critique. And then that's how they ultimately end up winning the argument. And that'll make more sense here shortly in terms of the theory that I'm about to provide for Marcuse, right? Again, the reason why I hold on to this is because of what Marcuse is telling us. And that is that the telos of tolerance is truth. Like, we're talking about actual, real, genuine tolerance here, bro. And the only way that that's going to get to is by truth. You got to be truthful and you got to be honest. And the only way that we can have truth and honesty is if we have an unfiltered, uncensored ideas that are being conveyed about the world that we're currently living in. You know what I mean? So, again, it's funny how these leftoids, right? They're going to and be up like, right? All right, a little bit of technical difficulties there, but I think we got this under control now, right? So again, going back to the whole lefties and how they like to, right? They like to be up in arms, dog, is the nicest way of putting it. At the idea of brainwashing people with propaganda, like they're really against it, okay? Whether it's cultural or political, they'll say shit like, you're just brainwashing your kids with this American dream and this, patriotism and imperialism and all kinds of bullshit, which they're not wrong. They're definitely not wrong. Okay. But they're going to turn around and they're going to attempt to do the exact same thing to people who don't agree with them. Like, what are we doing here, bro? What is the purpose of this alleged institution of higher learning? Are we really here to question fucking, ask these difficult questions in order to get to a better, clearer understanding of what truth, assuming that it exists, is? Or are we just here to fucking circle jerk each other and create this elaborate story that we're going to conveniently use to uphold the ideas that we believe in? And when you're doing shit like, pointing the finger in one direction and accusing the other side of propagandizing, but not returning it and, doing the same to yourself, that's basically what you're doing, right? So this is where a lot of the pushback that I received in my doctoral program came from, okay? And it's also where a lot of the pushback that they also rightfully received, dog, from, people who see through that facade and they refuse to accept it. They're not going to sit here and be moralized by some fucking people that don't have their lives together because they're terrible wrecks of actual individual people. They've never conversed with their Tezcatlipoca. They've never done the shadow work necessary to come to terms with what it is that is actually driving them in the first place, right? This neurotic obsession with control and fear of death, if you ask me personally. And because of that, they're fucking using any sort of, they're trying to shelter themselves from having to reconcile those issues with any sort of distraction. And what better distraction than, the alleged concern for other people? Because then you put yourself on a fucking moral grandstand and you try to moralize to other people who don't believe like you. And when they, and when they challenge you, you try to accuse them of being racist, sexist, homophobic, and so on. But that's just not true. Okay. I know me personally, dog. And this is going back to the typo negative shit. Again, more reason why it just like, maybe it just shaped me and molded me in a way that I, don't even understand. Or maybe it just resonated so deeply with me because that's literally me, bro. That's how I've always felt, right? But I don't hate on anybody, dog. But when you fucking try to moralize to me and put yourself on this alleged privileged fucking position of superiority, then I'm going to wear the hats that you're accusing me of, dog, for no other reason than to irk and troll your stupid ass. It's that simple, right? And I know a lot of the meme culture, for sure, that's what it's predicated on, dog. The idea that the people who are making the memes and sharing the memes, they're not racist. They're not, in many instances, sexist, transphobic, homophobic. I mean, there are some, but the majority of people are just trying to irk these fucking fake woke libs who falsely believe that they have this moral superiority because they have a college degree. Like, fuck you. A college degree in many instances just demonstrates, especially the liberal arts, like absolutely the liberal arts. All that demonstrates is that you had the ability to fucking to be indoctrinated. Like, that's all it shows me personally. If you don't have the ability to engage in these critical discussions, then you just demonstrating that you were indoctrinated, right? And if that's the case, you absolutely do not get the opportunity, the right to lecture the rest of us on what you believe is the quote unquote truth just because you have a degree. Like, fuck you, dog. A degree is not a measurement of intelligence. It's not, the ability to think critically and to create is the measurement of intelligence. A degree just shows that you were either good enough to get D's and C's, or that you were a good, a good boy and good girl and were able to mindlessly regurgitate the majority of the information that you were asked to memorize rotely just to pass your classes. Like, and this is the liberal arts that I'm speaking of here, right? Again, I know me personally, that's one of the issues that a lot of students have in my class. And that's that I don't offer rote memorization, Scantron quizzes. Like we're here to think, dog. And if you're used to this idea that you're going to get a study guide and the answers are going to be A, B, C, or D, like you're going to have a difficult time in my class. The philosophy is easy. Learning the philosophy is easy, right? But can you think critically? Can you fucking think creatively? That's the difficult part, right? And that's where actual intelligence, I believe, is measured. And, you know, that is where I personally understand that we must allow, why we must personally allow people the opportunity to understand why ideas are wrong by coming to their own conclusions as to why they are wrong of their own volition, rather than being moralized to by shitbags who, you know, again, don't even have their lives together in the first place, dog. There's something inherent about humans that when we look to somebody who's something of a moral exemplar, their ability to have their life in fucking order, it goes a long way. It really does, right? And when these people don't, when they demonstrate some sort of lack of impulse, maybe because they're obese, for example, or they demonstrate a lack of discipline because, you know, they can't stop themselves from engaging in, you know, maybe they're alcoholics. They don't have the discipline to tell themselves, no, I'm not going to drink today, right? Inherently, we look at these people, whether we're doing so biasly or unconsciously, and we're like, why the fuck am I going to listen to you? You don't even have your life in order. You're trying to tell me, get the fuck out of here, Jordan Peterson, Mr. Benzo Addict. I don't have fucking time to listen to what you have to say, bro. Okay? And this is exactly what Marcuse, I mean, I'm extrapolating a little bit with that last part, but in getting back to the text of Marcuse, this is exactly what he's talking about in the section of this text, right? He's telling us this shit is not ready-made, or it's not given to us, dog. Okay? It has to be gleaned through, or it has to be gleaned by, to use his language, cutting through, by quote unquote splitting, by breaking asunder that which separates our understanding of what is right and wrong, good and bad, correct and incorrect. This is an individual process that each individual one of us, we must undertake on our own, regardless of any preconceived biases that we may have that would falsely lead us to believe that we are somehow above it, because we're not, right? Even me, dog, I've been doing this shit my whole life, basically, teaching it for the last 10 years professionally, right? Podcasting it for the last 6 almost years now. It's 5.5, right? And even now I can admit, dog, like, I don't know shit. I'm still learning, bro. Like, I'm never at any moment a complete product. You know what I mean? And to think that I'm above that just because I have a degree, just because I'm teaching it, that's wrong, dog. What's wrong, dog? Right? Nothing. What's wrong with you, dog? Right? Anyways, at its core, right? At its core, this whole notion is predicated on the all-inclusive character. This is what Marcuse is going to tell us. It's predicated on the all-inclusive character of quote-unquote liberalist tolerance, right? That tells us that humans are individuals who can learn to hear and see and feel for ourselves. And thus, who could develop our own thoughts and grasp out our own interests and our own capabilities. This implies that sometimes, dog, people are going to use that to not fall in line with what is expected of them. And that doesn't, by default, immediately make them wrong or right for doing so. Again, think of Peter Steele, homie, right? And again, another example, I guess a better example, not better, different, would be Daryl Davis, the black dude who has helped so many people give up their association with the KKK. I don't know his entire life story, but I'm pretty sure he's never picked up a book on theory. And I can guarantee you that for an absolute fact, he has done more for the cause, again, than some fucking, elitist academic theory cell who just sits in fucking their office and writes these manifestos about why everyone but themselves is wrong. You know what I mean? And the funny part, dog, is that those kinds of people, are going to shit on Daryl Davis for even talking to a white supremacist in the first place. Even white people will accuse Daryl Davis of being a white supremacist. And it's like, bro, you are lost, dog. You are lost, bro. Okay? The hypocrisy. Like, I just can't help but laugh that to this day, there are people, my bad again, some more continued technical difficulties to round out the last portion of this podcast episode. But it's all good, dog. The spirit of Huitzilopochtli, we overcome no matter what, right? The hypocrisy, dog. It's hilarious to me, okay? That there's people out there to this day, so many examples of them accusing brown and black folk, right, of being white supremacists for not kowtowing to the identity politics line. And in going back to Marcuse, he tells us that one reason that this happens is that because when you allow people the rights to do so, allowing people rather the rights to do so was realistically the founding rationale of freedom of speech and assembly. Like, it bothers me, but like, you're an idiot, but you're okay. Like, talk your shit. You know what I mean? Like, you have the right to do so. It would be hypocritical of me to say otherwise. You know what I mean? And when I say I'm an absolutist in free speech, that means that I'm okay with fucking dumbass white educated, or I should say, Euro-Americans accusing me as a brown person of being a white supremacist because I don't fucking kowtow to Latinx, right? Politics. Like, you're dumb, you're wrong, but you're allowed to say it. Like, okay, it is what it is. You know what I mean? And that's what I'm talking about when he says that allowing people the right to do this is the founding rationale of freedom of speech and assembly. Like, and if you're going to take that away from anybody, you're taking it away from everybody, basically, right? Because when this is jeopardized, when this rationale no longer prevails and tolerance is administered to, this is a really good part right here that he talks about, and so I'm going to quote him. When tolerance is administered to quote unquote manipulated and indoctrinated individuals who parrot as their own the opinion of their masters, then heteronomy becomes autonomy. So basically that's when shit goes bad, right? Man, I just, I marvel at this Marcusean shit, bro. Just almost 60, it's like 60 years old, and it sounds like it was written just yesterday, right? But that just gives an insight into how long humanity as a whole has been dealing with the propagandizing of the master ruling vampiric class, right? It's always been happening, dog. And as much as we like to think that this is the worst of all times, the fact of the matter is it's probably better than it's ever been, right? With the exception of the people, now we have more distractions at our disposal to keep us from collectively organizing and making some sort of material change. But at least we have access to the information at a scale that was never, ever available before, right? I have to emphasize that this part is critical in understanding the entirety of this article. And it is the importance not only of free and informed access to information, but more importantly, information also that hasn't been purposely manipulated or censored in any way, right? This is what Marcuse is trying to tell us, okay? And I would add on to that also the responsibility that we have to be, like us personally, dog, we have the responsibility to be informed agents. I hate, there's nothing more grotesque, again, than people complaining about shit they have no intention of ever really changing. And it's easy to, complain about society, man, but, do nothing in return to the real actual only change that we can ever make to society, which is ourselves, right? So it's at this point in the essay then where Marcuse shifts focus away from tolerance towards the tolerance that's usually allotted to radical extremes, minorities, subversives, and the like. And instead, he starts focusing on tolerance towards the majorities, towards official and public opinion, right? And towards the established protectors of freedom. That's the tolerance that we're going to be focusing on moving forward, okay? And he tells us that this discussion can only have a frame of reference within a democratic society in which people, as individuals, as well as members of a political and other organizations, participate in the making, sustaining, and changing of policies, okay? Now, as I mentioned in my previous episode, Marcuse reminds us that opposition and dissent, right, in these types of societies are generally tolerated until they start to deal in violence. The moment shit, actual praxis starts to take place, that's when the powers that be, if you will, the masters of mankind, the bourgeoisie, they, right? That's when they start to take umbrage. You could, theory sell all you want, dog, but the moment you start to actually make fucking material change, that's when we have problems with them. Which again, just to reiterate from the last episode, is convenient. Again, but we're moving past that discussion, right? What Marcuse is telling us now is that if this is the case, if people really do freely choose to organize this society as writ of their own volition, like, well, this is the way it is because we decided it to be this way, then any potentially necessary change, ideally, would come about from a natural course of events. Like, people would look at how things are and they would say, we don't like this, so we're going to come together collectively and change it because we have the power to do so. And that's not what happens, okay? Because as Marcuse tells us, everything from, again, the very language that we use to try to generate any sort of change to the actual physical actions necessary to do so is heavily manipulated, controlled, and administered by the ruling class, right? So in terms of like, okay, we got to situate this Marcusean character. He's a critical theorist, which would make him a Marxist. And as a Marxist, that means that he's informed by the, transcendental idealism of Hegelianism, right? And what the transcendental idealists in general, as any idealist would, believes in is that ideas are like the grand, like the highest form of human achievement. Ideas are, right? And that ideas, what they are, some people would say like they're the divine touch of God that puts them in our brains, right? Others, they're not going to go so far. But what happens then essentially is that these ideas are the locus for change into the material world, right? So the argument here is that nothing can change in the material, and I mentioned this in the previous episode, but nothing can change in the material world unless the ideas have been introduced into the minds of the peoples, into the collective consciousness, if you will, right? So this idea that Marcuse is going to introduce next, it's rested on this assumption, right? Because even though he's a Marxist, and Marxism is the inversion of the idealism of Hegelianism, there's still a lot of, it's a synthesis, and I guess use a language that I'll introduce later. And because of that, there is still some bit of influence, right? That's why Marx wrote the books that he did, because he understood ideas do, in fact, change, the working material conditions of the workers, I should state, right? So what Marcuse is telling us then is that, okay, you can't do actual physical revolt because then you'll get in trouble, right? And we can't even do intellectual revolt because the ideas that we have been so carefully micromanaged to the most minute detail that inevitably they're going to end up in the exact same place that they started, thereby precluding any actual genuine change from ever occurring, okay? What he tells us is that our ideas, they're prepared, defined, and introduced into the marketplace, in which they would be, ideally, they should be tested and refined under free and equal discussion. But again, that's not what happens under a heavily administered, censored society. And that because of that, what we have instead is that we have a bunch of indoctrinated individuals who mindlessly parodying the ideas they believe to be their own, to use Marcuse's language, right? In this case, these ideas that, again, have been prepared for them by the ruling class, okay? And if you deviate from them in any way, you will be censored, right? Whether it's being, blackballed in the 1960s from academic discussion and civil discourse to being shadow banned currently in the modern technological era. If you offer a competing narrative, you're going to get fucking censored. And that's the whole point of why he's stating like, no, you can't allow for this censorship to occur, right? And that's exactly what his next point is going to be. He tells us that the hidden premise in this assumption is that free and equal discussion can fulfill the function attributed to it only if it is rational expression and development of independent thinking, free from indoctrination, manipulation, and extraneous authorities. So basically what he's stating is that if these ideas have been manipulated in any way, like the way academics love to do, like the way the progressive left loves to do when they censor, it's not free discussion, and therefore it's not organic. It's something that's been prepared, and it's in this preparedness is going to lead to an inevitable foregone conclusion, which, as previously mentioned, does nothing more than benefits the established ruling order. And what Marcuse is suggesting is that if we didn't have this, if this wasn't an issue, internal tensions will reveal themselves, and the underlying fact that despite the facade of functionality, this is a deeply flawed system. I mean, it seems like it's working. If you look around, and it's like, oh, it seems to be working, right? But no, it's not. It's a deeply flawed system that pits the real interests, okay, of laborers and management, right? Between laborers and management, consumers and producers, or, my own personal favorite, the intellectual, right? The quote unquote intellectual, whose vocation conflicts with their employers and thus finds themselves submitting to a system in which the former, the quote unquote intellectual, your boy, Ice motherfucking Nice, are always powerless and appears reasonable. Look, Ice Nice, we love that you have a podcast to help teach people philosophy, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't fall in line with what it is that we culturally sanction. And because of that, you either shut the fuck up and stop talking about it or face potential repercussions for doing so. And it's like, damn, dog, you're making me appear to be fucking crazy because doing so delegitimizes any sort of valid critique that I'm offering here, right? And what you're doing then, by making it seem as it's crazy and unreasonable, suggestion that I'm offering, you're making any other suggestion that I have to offer to improve society also appear unreasonable, and therefore making any potential movement that comes from those ideas potentially defanged and powerless, right? You make any sort of improvement in the quote unquote to the normal chain of events, the flow of events of life, impossible, right? Because you've delegitimized me just based off the words that I'm using to convey my ideas. Which again, as previously mentioned in the previous episode, ultimately does nothing more than benefit the established order, right? Like, I don't know, man. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but maybe your fucking family does it and you can share this with them, right? Corporations and the military industrial complex don't give a motherfuck about the gay and trans community, homie, okay? Those ads, those targeting campaigns are manufactured, right? And in order to further their appeal and reach. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less, right? And in turn, the people who don't support this, they're not intrinsically homophobic or transphobic. If the United States government is trying to push an agenda of inclusivity, we're talking about a government that's founded on genocide, dog, okay? And then they'll try to say like, well, we're trying to make up for that. No, you're not, because you're still committing a genocide in Palestine. So shut the fuck up. You're not doing that, okay? Like, and if you really want to apologize for the genocide, give the land back, motherfuckers. That's, like praxis, real shit, right? So the idea that they're somehow in favor of the gay or trans community and that the people who dismiss what the United States government is trying to say are somehow against the gay and trans community, that's obscenely irrational, dog, okay? Like, maybe some people are homophobic and transphobic, but most people aren't, dog. Perhaps they're just suspicious of why this agenda is being pushed, right? And perhaps they're rightfully skeptical, right? Because it's one of the 3 responsibilities of a philosopher. You have to be skeptical, okay? Rationality, skepticism, and fallibility, bro. And if you're not practicing any of those at any given time, then you're not thinking critically. So you should be skeptical. Anytime someone tells you anything, including the United States government, when they tell you that you should support X, Y, and Z, whether it be, your own country, whether it be the trans community, etc., right? You're right. You're justified to be skeptical of what it is they're telling you and why it is they're telling you, right? And you have the right, moreover, this is the Marcusian part, to think those ideas through on your own without any sort of external influence, right? To come to your own conclusion. And most people, because again, most people aren't shit, dog. Most people are good people, will inevitably of their own volition come to the conclusion that, being a homophobe or a transphobe, an actual homophobe, transphobe, sexist, racist, etc., is not an ideal way to live your life. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, are these people really, all the isms and phobes that that you're accusing them of, or are they rightfully skeptical of who is pushing this narrative? And, whether conscientiously or not, they're choosing not to partake in it, even if they don't have the language to articulate it, dog. This is the important part. This is circling back to some shit I talked about in the previous episode. Like this idea that you have to have legitimized academic language in order to justify beliefs that you have. Like, nah, dog, that's elitist thinking, bro. Okay. And what Marcuse is rather going to tell us with the affluence of democracy is that the affluent discussion is always going to prevail. And that within its established framework, it is largely tolerant by default, which gives us, again, the impression of a free society. And he's going to tell us that in such a society, all points of view can be heard without issue, right? Like you can get online and read about the communists, the fascists, the lefts and rights, the whites and the blacks and so on, right? That's his language, to be clear, okay? And not only is that tolerated to do so, but it's encouraged, okay? To quote, again, Marcuse, he tells us, in endlessly dragging debates over the media, the stupid opinion is treated with the same respect as the intelligent one. The misinformed may talk as long as the informed, and propaganda rides along with education, truth with falsehood. So he's basically telling us straight up, dog, that this toleration of sense and nonsense is justified by the democratic argument that nobody, neither group nor individual, is in possession of the quote unquote truth. Because again, the postmodernists conveniently decided that there is none. And because of that, no one can ever question that. Despite the fact that not being able to question it goes against the spirit of postmodernism, but whatever, right? Like if you tell a postmodernist, if they tell you that truth is subjective, and then you tell them, I agree, and that's why I don't agree with you or what you have to say, they again start to out fucking and lose their mind. And it's just like, I'm just saying what you told me. Like I'm literally mirroring what you just said, bro. Truth is fucking subjective. It's relative, right? So I don't have to agree with you, and that doesn't make me wrong, and it doesn't make you right, right? And that's the whole premise behind the democratic principle that Marcuse is talking to us here, right? And because this is the case, they use this to justify the idea that all consenting opinions must be submitted to the people for its deliberation and choice. So the idea here is that since there is no, universal truth, let's just leave it up to the people to decide what the truth is. And whatever they decide, we'll go with that and we'll call it democratic because that's what the people desire. But as he previously suggested, and as I qualified earlier, this operates under the false assumption that these people, quote unquote, I quote unquote it because are they people or are they NPCs? Are they human or are they dancer? Right? I don't know. But what I do know is that this idea that you can just leave these complex issues up to the quote unquote people is always highly suspect because it operates under the false assumption that these people are capable of deliberating and choosing on the basis of knowledge that was gleaned from free and informed access to information that was, free of any sort of external manipulation, and that the thought that they arrived to was the result of an entirely autonomous process that emerged from rational inquiry in the first place. And that's not what's happening. That's not at all what's happening, right? As Marcuse tells us, most people are just parroting the narrative that they've heard fucking from some sanctioned body, right? That they're basically nothing more than Muppet-ass NPC motherfuckers who are doing nothing more than regurgitating the indoctrination that they've been given with, that they've been, inculcated with rather, by the established ruling order, the parasitic vampiric capitalist class, to use the language that was introduced earlier, right? It's funny, man, because Marcuse is basically like, in not any direct terms, telling you like straight up, someone needs to tell these brainwashed Muppets to shut the fuck up. These people out here who are peddling their nonsense, you got to tell them to shut the fuck up, dog, because, they're not right. It's simple. They're not right. And telling them to shut the fuck up, it's not anti-gay. It's not anti-trans. It's not anti-black. It's not anti-Semitic. And it's not anti any other chosen group of people that has been privileged to justify totalitarianism and anti-humanism, right? This is Marcuse's language, dog. And he's going to highlight this idea by continuing on to say that the democratic argument for abstract tolerance, it tends to be invalidated by the invalidation of the democratic process itself, meaning that the democratic process has been subverted when people aren't freely informed and heavily propagandized. Okay. So the idea that you're engaging in a democratic, process to arrive at what the correct truth is, that's nonsense. You bypass that by bypassing the actual democratic process itself in the first place. Okay. And, this is something again that we've seen in full effect with the censoring of competing opinions that go against the established order, which currently allegedly supports progressive values, right? Again, I got to continue to emphasize, dog. People, for the most part, I'm not buying this human nature is nasty, brutish, and short. I'm not buying it. Propaganda, right? I think some people are fucking shit, no question about it. But most people are badass, dog. And they don't have beef with trans people, with gay people, with Jews, with black peoples, with Hindus now, apparently, right? What we got beef with is authoritarian systems of control that are pushing agendas that are clearly against our interests under the guise of the aforementioned, and then using those aforementioned minority groups to shield themselves and to deflect any sort of viable criticism that is lobbed their way. To this end, Marcuse tells us that the liberating force of democracy was the chance that it gave to effective dissent on both the individual and the social scale, okay? It rested on its openness to, qualitatively different forms of government, bro, of culture, of education, of work, of the human existence in general, okay? And that as such, the toleration of different free discussions and the equal rights of the opposites was to define and clarify the different forms of dissent, their direction, their content, and their prospect, okay? So this is just a really fancy philosophical way of stating, like, this is the dialect, dog, straight up, okay? And it's, I guess, anti-dialectical in a way to think that you can stifle complementaries, right? Because that quite literally defies the logic of everything that we know about reality. You know what I mean? Like, maybe you don't like the nighttime. Maybe you've been propagandized to believe that the nighttime is bad and an omen of ill fortune and all that kind of shit, right? But no matter what you do, nothing you do is ever going to stop this. Is never going to stop the nighttime from coming, dog. It's literally impossible. And moreover, the quote unquote bad that the night offers in many instances does have a little bit of goodness that can be gleaned from it too. You know what I'm saying? Now, before I continue on with this next sentence that Marcuse breaks us off with, I want to remind you all that this, again, it was written in the 1960s, dog. And even then, he's telling us that with the concentration of economic and political power in the integration of opposites, okay, in a society which uses technology as an instrument of technology. This is before social media, dog. This is before, allegedly, the internet. I don't know when the internet was invented. Maybe they had it back then, but it wasn't proliferated to the scale that it is today, right? Whatever the case, he's going to tell us that the concentration, again, of economic and political power and the integration of opposites in a society which uses technology as an instrument of technology, effective dissent is blocked, where it could freely emerge in the formation of opinion, in information and communication, in speech and assembly. This is what made Elon Musk initially purchasing X, Twitter, whatever, so important, because obviously Twitter had become a fucking left liberal cesspool, right? Progressive liberal cesspool. And it was stifling the conservative argument. Like, it was documented, right? But it's funny because now, when Elon bought it, they, were operating under the pretense that they were going to be different, but they're not. Now, currently, Elon is himself blocking people who are critiquing him of attempting to import what they are considering to be cheaper labor in order to undermine the American worker. Again, there's this weird ass tension that's happening right now, dog. It's like, I have faith in humanity as a whole, right? Regardless of how dark the night might be. Because it seems, again, as though there's like this weird emerging class consciousness where even the left and the right wing are looking at each other like, hold up, you and me both agree with something here? And that is that Elon Musk is a bitch, right? For different reasons, but we can both agree to this much in general. Like, that brings me hope, dog, because it's slowly, again, as time continues to unfold, revealing the vast similarities that we have and how inconsequential the alleged differences we have truly are, which is a foundational element in the emergence of a class consciousness, right? Now, going back to Marcuse, what he's going to tell us is that under the rule of monopolistic media, who themselves are the very the instruments of economic and political power, the propagandizing arm, right? A mentality is created for right and wrong and true and false, right? Rather, truth and falsity are predefined wherever they affect the vital interests of society. This is what I was talking to you about earlier, where the language that we use, it's like the fundamental building blocks of ideas. And if you can control the language that we're using, you can control the ideas that we're using. And if you can control the ideas that we're using, you can control not only the start point of an argument, but the end point of the argument as well. And where that start point is and where that end point is always predetermined by the intellect, by the ruling class, who tell you what you can and can't say, who tell you what you can and can't believe, and who do so because by controlling the language and the ideas, they're able to ensure that no tangible critique and no actual physical action against their established order will ever take place. This is what Marcuse is telling us, Doug. He's telling us that the blocking of effective dissent of that which is inherently anti-establishment, it begins in the language that is publicized and administered. The meaning of words is rigidly stabilized, he tells us, right? I don't think we're thinking like 1984 speech here, new speech, right? Along with all the other languages that were all the other current language, I should say, words that we're told currently we can't say. I know for me personally, as I was writing this, I just couldn't help but think about social media and, meme culture, the meme wars, if you will, right? And how there's currently a pushback among those peoples against those there's currently a pushback from the quote unquote alt-rights, the meme war veterans, if you will, who are pushing back against those people who are telling us that we can't say shit like gay and retarded, for example, right? And again, at a surface level, most people will see it as a desire. Most people, okay, let me be very clear what I'm trying to say here, right? Calling a gay person gay as an insult is fucked up and it's wrong, right? And calling somebody with mental, disabilities retarded to, mock them, that's fucked up and it's wrong, right? But us believing that, I'm thinking like Eminem here back in the early 90s, thinking that, when guys are kicking it among one another with just the homies, you know what I mean? And like, oh, bro, you're fucking gay or you're fucking retarded, bro. You know what I mean? That we're somehow even thinking about gay people or retarded people. Like, you guys aren't even in our consciousness, bro. I'm talking about my homie here. I'm talking about my friends and what they're doing, the actions they're engaging in. You know what I mean? That's got nothing to do with wanting to shit on gay people or the mentally disabled. Like, it's just the language that has been, that people collectively, the working class, have come up with to, express their reality, right? And so on the one hand, like, yeah, I agree. You shouldn't be allowed to fucking, I don't agree. I would go against what I just said earlier, but it's like, it's fucked up. I will say it's fucked up to, be a homophobe and call gay people gay to try to, insult them. But it's also disingenuous to think that anytime someone says something is gay, that it's fucking like homophobic, or that, every time someone says that something is retarded, that it's inherently ableist, right? It's disingenuous to do that. And the problem with this disingenuity is that they know, the powers that be, they know, okay? They know that that language can be politicized and, it can be controlled in such a way to ensure that people don't use that language. Now, this is a very, very silly example. Okay. I know it's a very silly example, but just hear me out here, right? By controlling that language. Look, okay. I've said this before. Conspiracy theories in many ways, I believe, are, the working class attempting to, make sense of capitalism without the assistance of academic theory. And this is similar in that vein, right? The language that is available to most working class people is not, and I hate saying this because it sounds very elitist, right? But they don't have the legitimized academic language to say something like, you are imposing your authority on my sovereignty. And I don't appreciate the paternalism because as an individual, I have the autonomy to be able to make decisions based off my own volition, right? Like, that's a heavily academic way of stating, like, fuck you, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want to do. And if you don't like it, I'm going to call you something, which the only thing I can possibly think of, because the language that I have available to me is gay and retarded. Like, it's gay of you and retarded of you to think that you have the ability to tell me what to do with my life. Like, I am a fucking adult. I have the ability to do whatever it is that I want to do, right? And you don't have the authority to tell me otherwise. Like, no, that's not how it works, right? And they know that. And in order to stop that critique from ever being, made public, they'll tell you, you can't use those words. those words are inherently homophobic and ableist. And if you do use them, that makes you a homophobe and an ableist, which basically is akin to you, supporting Hitler. And it's like, hold up. Like, no, that's not what's happening here, bro. Right? By controlling, and engineering this language that we use to explain our, explain, our experience of reality, you are shaping and controlling it to something that it is that you can fucking utilize to your advantage, which is never against the interest, or rather, which is never in the interests of the working class peoples. Which is why I continue to insist, like, they're not conspiracy theorists. They're not, again, some are, but the majority of people aren't, dog. Most people aren't conspiracy theorists. Most people aren't, sexist, racist, ableist, homophobes, transphobes, etc. Right? They just don't have the language to be able to properly articulate their frustrations with what it is that they're experiencing, right? Because the language and the ideas have been created in such a way to ensure that they uphold the established order. And the established order, again, is always in the interest of the bourgeoisie, who are ruthlessly, vampirically extracting every ounce of resource and energy from the working class people, right? And just because they don't have a fucking degree and the language that's justified with it to explain why they're not okay with that doesn't mean they're wrong in articulating that sentiment, okay? To utilize Marcuse's language, this is like his actual language from the text, he tells us that rational persuasion to the opposite, is all but precluded, as the avenues of entrance to different modes of thinking are closed to the meaning of words and ideas other than those that are already legitimized and established, which of course is always done by the peoples who have the quote unquote power to do so, along with the actions that they enable. He's telling us that other words, they can be spoken, right? They can be heard and expressed, ideas expressed, but they're always immediately evaluated, which is his way of stating they're always immediately automatically understood, right? Because to evaluate means you have the ability to think of it critically, which, as he's already established, is not happening given the miseducation and heavy propagandization that we've been subjected to, right? In terms of the public language. So he gets like very, very, very highly technical here, right? He starts talking about like a priori, how language a priori determines the direction in which thought process moves, which is basically everything that I just told you. The words build the ideas that shape our reality. Language shapes reality, right? A little bit of the postmodern influence there. And if you control the language, you can control the ideas and thus what people perceive to be as reality. And the fucked up part about this is that if we allow for this to happen, there's never going to be any beating these people at that game. Because again, the very language, ideas, and beliefs that are inherent with that game have already been set up to end at a predetermined conclusion, regardless of which route you take, right? That's like the funny part to me personally. I don't think it's funny. Like, it's just laughable to me. Like when I see, Ben Shapiro's little smug bitch ass, right, dunking on college freshmen, or what's his name? Damn, that other fucking right-wing dickhead. I forgot his name, right? But he's the one that's always going on. How is it possible that 13% of the population makes up 50% of the that guy? Oh, there we go. Charlie Kirk, right? Or of course, bitch ass Jordan Peterson. Like, they have this smug aura about them because they think that they're fucking superior to these people that they're trying to dunk on because they have these brilliant ideas that are infallible. And it's like, nope, these ideas are actually very shit. They're shitty ass ideas. But what you're doing is that you're playing a game, okay? It's a language game. You're playing a language game that has been, all the pieces have been set in advance. The moves have been all determined in advance, right? And all you're doing is moving from point A to point Z against people who, no matter how valiantly try to fucking, critique you, are inherently at a disadvantage because the language that they have at their disposal inherently dictates that they're not going to be able to themselves maneuver outside of the rules and frameworks that have already been predetermined in the game, right? So inevitably, it's not a matter of them being like, again, Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, Jordan Peterson, these dudes that bring these women onto podcasts, right, to explain to them why they're fucking whores or whatever. Those women, they can never do anything. There's nothing they're going to be able to do to argue otherwise because the game has been set in such a way to be inherently misogynistic. And no matter what they're never going to be able to circumvent that because the society itself upholds this misogyny, right? The same with Jordan Peterson, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro. Like, they're playing a game and all they're doing is trying to get from point A to point B. They're not smart. They've just mastered the game. And, that's it. And they know the moves to get inevitably to the conclusion, the predetermined conclusion that they're trying to get to, because that's the game has been set up. Okay. And that's exactly what Marcuse means when he tells us that the process of reflection ends where it started. If this is the game we're playing, the moment you even start to, try to reflect on it, the game is over because you're inevitably going to end at a predetermined conclusion. In terms of capitalism, the predetermined conclusion will always be communism bad. 100 million people starved in the 20th century. Like, bro, first of all, the idea that it's even framed in this false binary of capitalism versus communism is a problem. Secondly, you've been indoctrinated, heavily propagandized with capitalist ideology your entire life, and you don't have the critical thinking skills necessary to argue otherwise. And yet here you are parroting this fucking nonsense for no other reason than you're trying to, you feel the need to throw your uninformed opinion out there to what? Satiate your ego, to uphold this fucking dominant order, to prove that you've mastered how to get from point A to point B or point Z, like I just mentioned in the previous game. Like, that's nonsense, dog, right? This is where Marcuse, he tells us that this is actually it's a linguistic gem for me. So I'm gonna read it word for word. He tells us this process is a self-validating process that justifies the argument of the discussion and repels the contradiction because the antithesis is defined in terms of the thesis, right? Again, chef's kiss. I can't help but nerd out on this, right? Because it's so simple and yet so complicated at the same time. It relies on an understanding of Marxist theory, but the basic idea is it's not even Marxist theory, dog. It's like basic human experience of philosophy, right? You have an idea. It's called the dialect. You have an idea, then you have a competing idea. Both of those clash together and they merge and form what is called a synthesis. And from that synthesis is born a new idea. And then that idea clashes with another antithesis to create a new synthesis, right? And then the process continues ad infinitum until we get a closer approximation of what truth is, assuming that it exists in the first place, right? The synthesis occurs when you take the best of both ideas and you discard the worst of both ideas and you create a new, better idea, right? And that process keeps unfolding, okay? And ideally, this is how discussion should unfold. This is how rational, discussion should unfold. But that's not what's happening. And that's what Marcuse is saying. Self-validating the argument of the discussion repels the contradiction because the antithesis is defined in terms of the thesis. This, ideally, is the democratic process. But what Marcuse is telling us is that this democratic process has been entirely undermined, not just because of the lack of critical thinking, okay, but because the language that people, that we're using to have these conversations in the first place, it's been meticulously refined to ensure that the only ideas that emerge from our usage of it are those that have been, ensured are going to serve the interests of the people in control. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? That's not Marcuse, that's someone else. Audre Lorde, I believe it is. But that's where she gets that from, right? Which is why, again, Marcuse is telling us that the process of reflection ends exactly where it started, which again is in the already given conditions of relations. That's why people are always like, well, there's no point in changing the world. This is just the way it is. No, dude, you're fucking lazy and you're propagandized and you refuse to do the critical thinking necessary and engage in the actual praxis necessary to make a better world. Going back to the beginning of the episode, I told you it all tie together, right? We have a responsibility. Every single person on this planet has a responsibility. Whether you accept that responsibility or not, that's up to you to decide, dog. What I do know for a fact is that this world can absolutely be made better, but it takes work. It takes rational, critical thinking. It takes deeply introspective individuals who have come to terms with who they are, what their purpose is on life, the finitude of life, etc., and so on and so forth, and who understand the importance of why it is that we're doing this in the first place, right? Community oriented as opposed to selfish, narcissistic individualism of the Western society, okay? as for Marcuse, what he does is he gives us a metaphor of war, right? To demonstrate his point. He tells us how, war and how it unfolds rather in accordance to the dialect that I just mentioned. So on the one hand, we have the thesis that we work for peace. And then you have the antithesis that we prepare for war, or even we wage war. And from there, we get this weird fucking synthesis that tells us that preparing for war is working for peace, which is what we basically have here in the United States today, right? So what Marcuse tells us is that war comes to be defined as a necessary precursor for peace, and that any conversation that attempts to argue otherwise will always be dismissed by the people who have the actual power to change that. You and me, dog. We, the everyday civilians, have the power to change that because we're the ones that are truly in power, right? It's the people in positions of power that realize that and, weaponize the propaganda arm to try to get us to believe otherwise, okay? And the controlling of language is not an insubstantial part of that process. And yeah, I guess this is about as good a point as any to go ahead and start winding this bitch down. I'll end it with just some quick final reflections, dog. First of which being, I don't simp for any politician. You already know my stance on this shit. I don't want a president. I want indigenization, right? However, with that said, he's already backtracking. He hasn't even taken office and he's already backtracking, dog. But it was refreshing to see Donald Trump come out on fucking national global television and start saying shit like, we're going to reinstill the First Amendment in this country. We're going to hold the technocrats accountable for censorship, right? Whether he actually does or not, I doubt he will, okay? The technocrats are the ones that fund Donald Trump and all the other politicians because they're the ones that own the government because they are the fucking bourgeoisie, right? And as long as there is a political system in place where you can buy sway, that's what we have, right? The people with the most amount of money can buy the most amount of sway, right? So whether or not he actually holds them accountable, I don't know. I doubt it. However, it was refreshing to see him fucking speak on this nonetheless, okay? And again, perhaps the most important part, like I just mentioned right now to conclude with, is the heavy onus of responsibility that is placed on us, okay, as individuals for replacing this structure. Again, it returns full circle to the indigenous knowledge that I introduced at the beginning of the episode. Our ancestors held themselves to a very high standard, bro. And this idea of resting on the laurels of your predecessors or blaming them for your shortcomings is an absolute no-go, okay? They weren't here. Like, they weren't. It's documented for any bitch-ass excuses, dog, as to why you don't have to contribute anything to life because, the pyramids have already been built, for example, or why you're a shitty person because your mommy abandoned you, or why society is fucked and there's nothing you can do about it because it's just human nature. Like, nah, bro. No, they're not here for that. At the core, all these, the aforementioned that I just mentioned, have one thing in common. And that is us, the individual. And as much as we would like to make excuses for ourselves to skirt the tremendous responsibility, the fact of the matter is, we have the responsibility always to do better. And if you don't, okay, your descendants our ancestors had that responsibility, and this is the world that we inherited from them. So whether you do or don't, it doesn't really matter, right? You probably aren't gonna have this grand ontological come to Jesus moment like David Goggins. Maybe you will, or maybe you won't. In this particular case, it doesn't matter, because if you don't do nothing, this is the world that your descendants are going to inherit. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, right? And just ask yourself, are you happy now? And if you aren't, why would you want your children and their children's children to inherit this world? Why wouldn't you want to do something to try to make it better, right? This is what I mean when I state, me personally, having to embrace the enormous responsibility that I feel that I've been given, that I descended to this earth with, right? Of educating. I would love to just sit and fucking numb myself out from the pains of existence through mindless social media, doom scrolling, through alcohol consumption, etc., and so on and so forth. And I can, and I have, right? But it comes at a cost. It comes at a very heavy cost. And whether I act on it or not, doesn't matter. My descendants are going to deal with it, right? So how much of the burden am I willing to bear, essentially? And the same for you. How much are you willing to bear as well? What is your purpose? What is your reason? And what are you doing to manifest it to cultivate a better future for your descendants, right? And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, if you're not doing that just yet, it's okay. Be kind to yourself. This is January 3rd, right? So I believe we're still in Panquetzalitli, right? But eventually, this is not the time. This is the point that I'm trying to make. As I mentioned earlier, the sun is still a baby right now. If you don't have the energy, it's okay. Don't plant the seeds in the winter. Just be ready, because the summer sun is coming. And when it does, you will have not one single excuse to not be in action. And yeah, that's about as good a point as any to wrap this bitch up. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I definitely enjoyed bringing it to you all, and I look forward to the next one. Until then, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.